Wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hey, ¿qué me dicen? How you guys doing? Uh, you guys got a day off of work? Who got a day off of work today? You guys barbecuing? You getting the grill ready? Or what's going on? What you guys doing today? On this 4th of July. Man, I remember when I was a kid in Boston, 4th of July. Yeah, we used to go over to family or just over to go see fireworks somewhere. I remember. What you guys doing? You guys got family over? Everybody's busy or what? What's going on? Talk to me. Help me share and like the video, guys, so we can get more people to come. So they can make at least let's get at least 100 people in here. Please like and share, help me get people over here. YouTube does not help me at all. Wow, come on. What you guys doing today? You chilling? Getting the grill ready? What's going on? Is it hot where you are? Summertime, middle of summer. Today we're gonna do a little 4th of July special. We're gonna do probably like 3 videos. Should be under 3 hours, 2.5. You know, that's all the time I'm gonna take from you today. I know you guys got family and you got plans and you're chilling. Or you might be working. I don't know. Making double today. You might be making double today and working. I don't know. Tell me your story. I see the live chat. Oh, you're at the beach, Ian? That's what's up. That is what's up. What beach you at? You're ready for the truth. That's what's up. Wow. Come on, guys. Let's get people in here. Help me like and share the video. You know, I won't start until I have 100 people. Come on. Kickback when Nick says it's just hanging out. He's a normal day to him. I know a lot of people don't celebrate or do anything. Yo, Matt just finished work. He's ready. That's what's up, Matt. That's what's up. We're gonna do this, Matt, and then we're gonna be free to do the other thing if you wanna hop on today, man. All right, he's Scottish. So we got somebody from Scotland say it's nighttime here. We ain't doing nothing. Let's go. Help me share the video, guys. Let's get some traffic in here so people can learn some real history, some background behind the things they celebrate. Come on. We're gonna show you how much the indigenous people are involved in today's day. And a little unknown background. I know a lot of you probably know all this information. You've probably seen the older videos. The internet back up. That's what's up, man. Okay. Where you at in the world? What you guys doing? Let me know. I don't see nobody writing. Come on. Hey, good day. Welcome, everybody. You sharing with everybody? Thank you, TS. I see it. Numbers are going up. Thank you, TS. I'm starting to see the numbers. We got 74. Come on. Concurrent visited viewers. See, people come, they click on it, and then they leave. Let's try to make them stay in here. Yeah, you gotta have the context. Gotta have the context behind things you celebrate. You gotta have the whole history. Shout out to everybody in the Bronx, Tanaka, Taurus. That's what's up, man. Welcome. Hit like and share, guys. Let me get people in here. Help me get traffic. YouTube does not send out notifications. I'm shadow banned. They don't want you knowing real history. Olmec say I ain't doing anything. That's what's up. Hey, Olmec, what's up? How hot is it in Arizona, Olmec? Is it hot? It's hot right now where you guys at? Where everybody at? Come on. Everybody's already barbecuing, already chilling. What's up? Looking forward. Yeah, hey, I'm looking forward to it too. I always like going over the certain info. I think a lot of people, I do videos sometimes, and yeah, for that day, people, oh, that's cool. And then we kind of forget all the info again. And so it's good to refresh A very heavy, deep notification. Oh, you got a notification? Okay, well, you did. A lot of people don't. A lot of people don't. We got 77 concurrent viewers, actually, right now. Come on, trying to get to 100. All right, well, here I am, 4th of July. We don't take breaks. We don't really celebrate. You know, Costa Rica, we have our own Independence Day, but there is 4th of July celebrations here. There's a lot of expats here living. Costa Rica is the second largest community of expats in the world. I think number 1 is Mexico, and Costa Rica would be second. A lot of American citizens that have retired or moved over to Costa Rica, so it has become a thing in the last 10 years where people do celebrate 4th of July. There's like 4th of July events here. You know, I went to one once a long time ago. My daughter came out in the newspaper. You know, out of everybody that was there, you know, because, you know, melanated little girl with the U.S., you know, they just decided to put her on the newspaper. Salute. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Yo, we got 81 concurrent viewers. Come on, guys. I'm trying to reach 100. Like and share. Like and share so we can get started. We're going to go over a little bit of context and background. You know, we're going to learn about who influenced the Constitution. Where did they really get that from? We're going to go over the background of the Boston Tea Party, who was involved with that, and you know, what really happened. And then we're going to talk about the first martyr of liberty. The first martyr of liberty. We're talking about Crispus Attucks. Let's go. Come on. You guys getting the grill ready and everything? Yeah. Wow, welcome. Come on. Help me get 100 people, guys. I know there's got to be 100 people that are interested in this. Come on now. It says 230 views, but only 87 concurrent viewers, so they come and leave. I don't know. I guess maybe you guys are sharing it to random people, and they're like, I don't want to see this. I got 4th of July to do. I don't care about history. I just want to celebrate it. I'm just happy I got a day off. Leave me alone, Kurimeo. I don't care. I don't want to know. I'm just happy I got a day off. And I'm gonna eat some steak and burgers and Oh, Jala says she ain't grilling today. She's just harvesting from the garden. That's what's up. Whoa, I said she, sorry. It could be he or she. Sorry about that. So Yala says I'm just harvesting. That's what's up. Harvesting from the garden. We got 93 concurrent viewers right now. Come on, 7 more and we'll start. Actually 93. See, I'm seeing the real time because I got the analytics open right now on my YouTube studio. So it's 93. Come on. 93 concurrent viewers. Come on. Don't go anywhere, guys. We got 7 more to go. Come on, guys. A lot of people, again, don't get the notification. A lot of people don't know I'm live yet, and they were like, oh man, I'm late. It always happens. So I'm trying to wait for some people so they can get the whole drop. At least 100. Come on, guys. Help me like and share. We can get this going. 4th of July special. I am him. Okay. Okay. That's what's up, brother. Brother Yala. That's what's up. Tia says she ain't he's not grilling. He or she, sorry. Grilling, just chilling. All right, not grilling, just chilling. I get it. Let's play it background while we do our thing. 98 concurrent viewers. We're almost there, guys. 2 more. Come on. Oh, that's what's up. We got somebody from Suriname. Welcome, Suriname. All my people in South America, in the mainland, South from Amaruka, Amarukapana. Shout out to everybody from Suriname, man. Shout out to all the Surinamese. That how you say it? Shout out to everybody from Suriname. Yeah, Baruch, all who are here. Yeah, Kyle, that's what's up. Blowing this ganja, waiting for this lesson. I get it. That's what's up. Meditation mode. Smoking one for the Buddha of the nation. That's what's up. All right, we got 101 people. Let's go. Getting started right now. We're gonna get started. Okay, that's what's up. That's what I wanted. At least 100 people, and that's what we're gonna get. All right. So we're gonna go over the background, origin, the context of the Constitution of America, in case you didn't know. Okay. So welcome. Let's get started, okay? Carolina in the building. Carolina in the building. Wow, all right, let's go.
To Topcast, great presentation he had on this, Amani Bay. Just want you guys to know that, the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and the American Union were established and influenced by American Indians, mainly the Iroquois. So we're just going to be reading a couple things here. Hope you guys enjoy. I'm going to be reading from this book, Indian Roots of American Democracy, edited and with introduction by Jose Barreto. We're in part 2 of this book. We're going to be reading from this chapter, Iroquoian Political Concept and the Genesis of American Government, Donald A. Grind, Jr. There is ample scholarly opinion and factual data to conclude that the Founding Fathers respected and used American Indian ideas as the American government evolved. Recently, a few anthropologists and ethnohistorians unfamiliar with the interpretive and documentary evidence have concluded that there is no evidence to support the notion that the Iroquois and other Native American confederacies had an influence on the evolution of American government. Such sweeping generalizations are facile and dated in light of the interpretive and documentary evidence that has emerged in the last 2 generations. Much of the scholarship that ignores the importance of Native American ideas and American history also marginalizes the role of American Indians in our history. The process of marginalization has gone so far that it is difficult for some scholars to believe that Iroquois Sakims were present at the debates surrounding the Declaration of Independence. As the debates on independence took place, Benjamin Franklin proposed his revised Albany Plan of Union as the new form of government. The Iroquois' visit to Congress in 1776 was no casual affair, okay? In August of 1775, they had been invited to view the workings of the Grand Council Fire in Philadelphia. In reality, scholars have painted the Iroquois out of the historical picture that portrays the road to American independence and self-government. 300 years ago, the ideas and political systems of the Iroquois and other confederations were so appealing that William Penn would describe Indian government in complementary terms. Penn described the native confederacies of Eastern America as political societies with Sakimship inherited through the female side. Penn was also familiar with the condolence ceremony of the Iroquois, which was crucial for an understanding of their confederacy. He stated that when someone kills a woman, they pay double the wampum, since she breeds children which men cannot. After exposure to American Indian forms of government and unity, William Penn proposed a plan for a union of the colonies in America. Although it was just an outline, Penn seemed inspired by his observations of American Indian polities. All right, the influence started way back with Penn. A couple of generations later, another Pennsylvanian, Benjamin Franklin, would formulate another plan of colonial union that would more closely reflect Iroquois influences. Franklin, familiar with the ways of the Iroquois, published a series of Indian treaties. He attended a condolence ceremony in 1753, less than a year before his authorship of the Albany Plan of Union. Franklin recognized the enormous appeal of American Indian ways in 1753 as well. He wrote in 1753 that American Indian children, reared in white society, returned to their people when they took but one ramble with them. While discussing the attractions of American Indian society, Franklin wrote of the Great Council of Onondaga and how the Six Nations educated their men in what was the best manner. Just 9 months before the Albany Congress of 1754, Franklin attended a treaty council at Carlisle, Pennsylvania in October 1753. During this treaty with the Iroquois and the Ohio Indians, Franklin saw the rich imagery and ideas of the Iroquois at close hand. On October 1st, 1753, he watched the Oneida chief, Scarojati, and a Mohawk Kayangilegua condole the Ohio Indians for their losses against the French. Franklin listened while Scarojati spoke of the origins of the Iroquois Great Law to the Ohio Indians. We must let you know that there was friendship established by our and your grandfathers, and a mutual council fire was kindled. In this friendship, all those then under the ground, who had not obtained eyes or faces, that is, those unborn, were included, and it was then mutually promised to tell the same to their children and children's children. The following day, Franklin and the other treaty commissioners echoed earlier statements of the Iroquois when they said, "We would therefore hereby place before you the necessity of preserving your faith entire to one another, as well as to this government. Do not separate, do not part on any score. Let no differences nor jealousies subsist a moment between nation and nation, but join together as one man." So Franklin's literally just repeating the values and the ways of the Iroquois. In replying to these remarks, Scarojaddy took for granted the knowledge that the treaty commissioners had of the structure of the Iroquois Confederacy when he requested that "you will please to lay all our present transactions before the council at Onondaga, that they may know we do nothing in the dark." Thus, on the eve of the Albany Congress, Franklin had a great deal of exposure to the imagery and political ideas of the Iroquois, both from first-hand experience and from his reading of Cadwallader Colden's History of the Five Nations. At the Albany Congress the next year, the Mohawk Sakim Hendrick challenged the Americans to use Iroquois-style unity and to bring as many into this covenant chain as you possibly can. With this ammunition and his previous knowledge of the imagery and concepts of the Iroquois Great Law, Franklin met with both colonial and Iroquois delegates to create a plan of unity that was in part derived from some of the tenets of the Great Law of the Iroquois. In fact, Franklin admitted that the debates over the Albany Plan went on daily with the Indian business. During the discussions, Hendrick openly criticized the colonists and hinted that the Iroquois would not ally with the English colonies unless a suitable form of unity was established among them. Hendrick asserted on July 9, 1754 that "we wish this fire tree of friendship may grow up to a great height, and then we shall be a powerful people." James Delancey, acting governor of New York, replied to Hendrick's speech in this manner: "I hope that by this present union we shall grow up to a great height, and then we shall be as powerful and famous as you were of old." The next day, Franklin formally proposed his plan of union before the Congress. It had a grand council, a speaker, and called for a general government, under which each colony may retain its present constitution. So Franklin was literally copying the Iroquois. That's what they're letting you know here. In 1943, after editing Franklin's Indian treaties, Julian P. Boyd stated that Benjamin Franklin in 1754 proposed a plan for union of the colonies, and he found his materials in the Great Confederacy of the Iroquois. Boyd also believed that the ability of the Iroquois to unite peoples over a large geographic expanse made their form of government worthy of copying. As Americans grew more restive under the autocracy of British rule, they turned to Native American ideas for alternatives. The Iroquois also provided the rebellious colonists with an alternative identity. During the Stamp Act crisis, the New York City Sons of Liberty, all right, we already got the drop on the previous video, who's the Sons of Liberty, sent wampum belts to the Iroquois asking them to intercept British troops moving down the Hudson to occupy New York City. All right, so you see they were allying with the Iroquois. After this appeal, the Sons of Liberty put up a pine post called the Tree of Liberty, where they conducted their daily exercises. All right, and that's that famous elm tree where they met, the Sons of Liberty and the Loyal Nine. In 1772, the Constitutional Sons of St. Tammany, I remember that this was the same people, the Sons of Liberty, eventually a lot of them became Sons of St. Tammany or switched the name, which grew out of the Sons of Liberty, all right, as it says here, claimed that they wished to preserve their constitutional American liberties. Tammany was a respected Delaware chief who American patriots sainted, all right? They had American Indian saints, all right? A lot of these Masonic orders, they made a lot of the chiefs saints, you know, just like the Catholic or Christian saints. The New York City Sons of Tammany traced their roots to the Sons of Liberty. Indeed, Benjamin Franklin was a member of the Tammany Society. Do you hear that? Benjamin Franklin was of this order, Masonic order, secret society, St. Tammany, and after his death, the society continued to tell Indian anecdotes of Franklin at its meetings. All right? Benjamin Franklin was down with these same people who dressed up like Iroquois and dumped the tea, yes. As the American Revolution drew nearer, the American colonists turned to American Indian ideas and images to assert their desire for freedom and autonomy. In 1773, the Sons of Liberty in Boston dressed as Mohawks to dump tea in Boston Harbor. Now remember that, yes, a lot of them dressed up and put coal in their face and everything to look to have a dark complexion, to look like Indians. But we also read that there was a number of Mohawks actually with them that went and helped them dump the tea. There was actually a lot of people that day.
We're gonna get the whole drop right after this. We're gonna get that whole background, who was involved with that whole Boston Tea Party thing. All right, so tune in, stay keen.
In August of 1775, members of the Continental Congress met with the Iroquois. All right, the Continental Congress. We're gonna get into who they were. These were the presidents before Washington. I know you guys know about this stuff, but we're gonna try to get more specific and try to understand why we don't know about these people, why they tell us Washington is the first president. Again, you guys can see that in August of 1775, the members of the Continental Congress met with the Iroquois and recalled Iroquois admonitions of unity and said, "We have taught our children to follow it." The Americans also invited the Iroquois to visit and observe our Great Council Fire at Philadelphia. In January of 76, George Washington introduced John Adams as a member of the Grand Council Fire at Philadelphia. In May and June of 1776, chiefs from 4 tribes of the 6 nations, all right, the Iroquois Confederacy, were at Independence Hall. In fact, the meeting with the Iroquois Sakeens was so important that the Continental Congress ordered George Washington to leave his post in New York City and come to Philadelphia to review Pennsylvania troops in late May of 1776. That's how important it was to meet with the Iroquois. And you know how they say, oh, the Iroquois were there, the Iroquois were there. But shout out to Top Cat, great presentation again. And you know that it was mainly Indians doing this as the Continental Army, you know, fighting in the war and, you know, influencing, helping them, teaching them how to do a government. On June 11, 1776, during the debates on independence, and Onondaga chief gave President John Hancock the name Caranduan, or the Great Tree. All right, remember John Hancock was a Sons of Liberty member, so they're naming him a Caranduan. Right, they're giving him a Indian name. This is what I want you to see: the relationship they had with the Iroquois, the Great Tree. On the same day, plans for a confederation based on Franklin's 1754 Albany Plan of Union were reported to a committee of the Continental Congress that later drafted the Articles of Confederation. Okay, these are the presidents before Washington. So based on Franklin's Albany Plan of Union, which was based on the Iroquois government, on that same day, reported to the Continental Congress, who later drafted the Articles of Confederation. This is the beginning of the U.S. democratic government. They got this from American Indians. After the Iroquois Sakeens left in late June, and as Franklin's revised Albany Plan was in committee, James Wilson, delegate from Pennsylvania and future author of the first draft of the United States Constitution, argued forcefully for a confederation similar to the Iroquois League. It has to be similar like them, guys. On July 26, 1776, Wilson asserted that Indians know the striking benefits of confederation, and we have an example of it in the Union of the Six Nations. Wilson recalled his diplomatic mission to the Iroquois in 1775, when he stated that the idea of the Union of the colonies struck the Iroquois forcibly last year. In essence, Wilson, a friend of Franklin, believed that a strong confederation like the Iroquois Confederacy was crucial not only to the development of the new nation, but also to the maintenance of friendly relations with the Iroquois. In 1777, the Continental Congress published propaganda using an Iroquois prophecy that emphasized the synthesis of European and Iroquois ways in North America. The pamphlet Apocalypse de Chiokoi Hekoi chiefs, the Iroquois, from 1777 asked the French to side with the Americans and implied that America was developing a government that reflected some Iroquois ways. Using a diplomatic idiom, a news carrier bird, Teshkleleli, the pamphlet proclaimed that an Iroquois prophecy was coming to pass, and that if the French allied with the Americans, it would be a great victory for humanity. As the revolution unfolded, the Iroquois' example of strength through unity gained a powerful hold on the American people. At Valley Forge, the Continental Army staged an elaborate St. Tammany Society ceremony on April 30 and May 1st of 1778. All right, who? The Continental Army. And again, shout out to Top Cat. Who was that Continental Army? A lot of Indians. They did what? They staged an elaborate St. Tammany Society ceremony. Washington's men marched past maypoles and clasped bundles of 13 arrows to demonstrate American unity in the style of the Iroquois. On the evening of May 1st, 1778, the officers had a song and dance in honor of King Tammany. After the American Revolution, 3 Virginia politicians and future presidents, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and James Monroe, decided to visit the Iroquois. The so-called black founding fathers visited the Iroquois. The first to go was James Madison in 1784, observing that Virginia and other states were unwilling to give powers to a central government. Madison decided to accompany the Marquis de Lafayette and his entourage on a trip to Iroquois country. The trip was to Fort Stanwix near Rome, New York. What Madison witnessed was startling. Ostensibly, Western expansion was Madison's main concern for the trip. Also, he must have been thinking about a government that would unite diverse peoples across a great geographic area when he thought of westward expansion. Perhaps this is the reason he consulted with his old friend Grasshopper and Oneida Sakim when he got to Iroquois country. These remarkable experiences had an impact on Madison as he was seeking to forge a new government in the next few years. While at Fort Stanwix, Madison renewed his friendship with the Oneida Sakim, Grasshopper, who had visited Philadelphia several years earlier. Madison was exposed firsthand to the ideas and political concepts of the Iroquois. Although Thomas Jefferson had wanted to visit the Iroquois with James Monroe in 1784, his appointment as French ambassador forced him to abandon his plans to go to Iroquois country. However, James Monroe did go without Jefferson. Jefferson was very emphatic about his lifelong interest in American Indians. In a letter to John Adams, Jefferson pointed out that as a child and as a student, he was in continual contact with Native Americans. He explained this contact in these terms: concerning Indians, in the early part of my life, I was very familiar and acquired impressions of attachment and commiseration for them which have never been obliterated. Before the Revolution, they were in the habit of coming often in great numbers to the seat of government, where I was very much with them. Emphasis added, I knew much the great Ontaset, the warrior and orator of the Cherokees. He was always the guest of my father on his journeys to and from Williamsburg. John Adams responded to Jefferson's experiences with American Indians in this manner: I have also felt an interest in the Indians and a commiseration for them with my childhood. Aaron Pomham and Moses Pomham of the Hunkapang and Neponset tribes were frequent visitors of my father's house, and I, in my boyish rambles, used to call at their wigwam. Real quick, in the journal article, The Iroquois League, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution, by Samuel B. Payne Jr. This is from the William and Mary Quarterly, Volume 53, Number 3, Indians and Others in Early America, pages 605 to 620. It says here, the standard works of the United States Constitution and the Articles of Confederation do not credit the American Indians with having contributed to their origins. Indians are absent as intellectual influences, right? So they're saying how they don't, give them the right credit. From such sources as Gordon S. Wood's The Creation of the American Republic, in The Radicalism of the American Revolution, Bernard Bailyn's The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution, Samuel H. Beer's To Make a Nation, and Jack N. Revolke's The Beginning of National Politics, to cite a few distinguished and representative examples. All right, so these are all like popular mainstream books on the origin of the Constitution and American democracy and all that, and they leave out, they never credited the Iroquois, is what they're pointing out here. Instead, these works describe the political ideas of 18th century British American leaders and thinkers as creative adaptations of the European intellectual heritage to American conditions. The intellectual roots of the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation lay, the mainstream authors assert, in Europe. All right, so they're saying all that came from Europeans. In Great Britain, above all, in continental Europe to a considerable extent, and in ancient Rome and Greece to a much lesser extent. So they're saying that goes back to Rome, huh? The Magna Carta, huh? We're going to get into that, all right, as we keep learning, right, on this journey. What's the Magna Carta? Is it similar to the Great Law of Peace? Who were the ancient Romans? In contradiction to the mainstream is a revisionist school that gives much of the credit to the American Indians, all right? On the other hand, there's much documentary evidence, as we just read. The revisionists believe that the Iroquois Indians, the forgotten founders as Bruce E. Johansen terms them, significantly influenced the joining together of the 13 colonies in 1776, the writing of the Articles of Confederation, and the construction of a federal system of government in 1787 and 1788. Although the Iroquois influence thesis lacks the persuasive power of the mainstream European influence thesis, it has been widely propagated and for that reason alone deserves serious critical examination. Lewis Henry Morgan, who made the first comprehensive study of the Iroquois politics and society, may also have been the first proponent of the Iroquois influence thesis. In 1881 he wrote, "It is worthy of remembrance that the Iroquois commended to our forefathers a union of the colonies similar to their own as early as 1755. Subsequent scholars developed and promoted this thesis, among them J.N.B. Hewitt, Felix X. Cohen, Donald A. Grind Jr., Johansen, Jack Weatherford, Orrin Lyons, John C. Mohawk, and Robert W. Venables. Charles Stewart Goodwin describes the Iroquois Confederacy as one of the three sources of inspiration for his proposed remodeling of the American system of government. The Iroquois influence thesis has been espoused by an American fraternal organization, the Imperial Order of the Red Men." All right, you understand why we learned about them first? You understand where we're going with this? All right, these are secret societies, these are Masonic orders, and they know what's up. They know America's the true old world, right? We read their books letting us know this is the true old world, the true Egypt. They know. They copied the ancient ones. Who? The Imperial Order of Red Men, and is preserved to this day as an oral tradition among the Iroquois themselves. In the last few years, the Iroquois influence thesis has shown signs of being accepted as a new orthodoxy in some quarters. Alvin M. Josephy Jr.'s 500 Nations, a well-received book written for a general audience, gives the Iroquois credit for having influenced the development of the Constitution. A recent curriculum guide for 11th grade history classes in New York State public schools prescribes the study of the Iroquois political system as one of the three foundations of the United States Constitution. In October 1988, the United States Congress passed a concurrent resolution asserting that the confederation of the original 13 colonies into one republic was influenced by the political system developed by the Iroquois Confederacy. As for many of the democratic principles which were incorporated into the Constitution itself. On the other hand, the Iroquois influence thesis is not yet universally accepted, even in the forms otherwise sympathetic to revisionist theses about American history. It's going to show you Indians ain't savage. It's going to show you who's the real founding fathers. It's all about American Indians really fighting for their revolution. It does not appear, for example, in the National Standard for United States History, Exploring the American Experience, issued by the National Center for History in the schools, right? They don't teach you this in schools. They don't emphasize it. The leading advocates of the thesis see Indian influence in many aspects of the United States system of government. life, liberty, and happiness, Declaration of Independence, government by reason and consent rather than coercion, Albany Plan and Articles of Confederation, all right? That was based on the Iroquois, right? The Albany Plan is what Benjamin Franklin, wrote and gave a speech on and, proposed, and that was based on the Iroquois. And that's what helped draft the Articles of Confederation. Religious tolerance and ultimately religious acceptance instead of a state church, checks and balances, federalism, United States Constitution, and relative equality of property, equal rights before the law, and the thorny problem of creating a government that can rule equitably across a broad geographic expanse, Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. Native America had a substantial role in shaping all these ideas. Okay? Other authors credit the Iroquois with having inspired female suffrage, the impeachment of government officials, and Congress employment of conference committees. The heart of the argument, where the documented record has the greatest claims to strength, concerns Indian influence on the joining together, first of the colonies under the Articles of Confederation, then of the states under the federal Constitution. Accordingly, the present essay focuses on these topics, that is to say, on the formation of the American Union. It concentrates on writings of Donald Grind and Bruce Johansen, all right? The creation of the American Union by who? By the American Indians, or the values or ideas of American Indians. So again, it concentrates on the writings of Donald Grind and Bruce Johansen, who have made the most detailed and authoritative statements of the Iroquois influence theses. It summarizes their argument and examines the evidence and concludes that their position is unfounded. All right, make sure to read the books from Donald Grind and Bruce Johansen for all the proof. They got it from the Iroquois, all right, the Constitution, there's no doubt. Grind and Johansen maintain that the Iroquois influenced the formation of the American Union in two ways. The first was through the advice and ideas that Iroquois spokesmen conveyed directly to the authors of the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. The second was through the force of example exerted by Iroquois political practices that American leaders observed and used as models in devising a new system of government. In evaluating the latter argument, it is important to distinguish among three images of the Iroquois. The Iroquois as they actually were in the 17th and 18th century, the Iroquois as the authors of the Articles of Confederation and the framers of the Constitution understood them to be in the late 18th century. All right, the true authors of the Articles of Confederation. Proponents of the thesis describe the Iroquois as constituting in the 17th and 18th centuries a powerful confederacy, the Iroquois League, comprising 5, later 6 nations. In the words of Grind and Johansen, each of the 5 nations maintained its own council, whose Sakims were nominated by the clan mothers of families holding hereditary rights to office titles. The clan mothers could remove a Sakim from office. There was also a Grand Council, made up of the 50 Sakims who led the 5 nations and other leaders chosen by the council itself, that met once a year to keep the peace among the Iroquois and to negotiate agreements with other Indians and with European colonists. However, the Grand Council could not interfere in the internal affairs of the tribe. The entire political structure was regulated and maintained by a type of constitution, the great law of peace, passed down over the centuries, and all oral traditions supplemented by the use of wampum bells as mnemonic devices. The Iroquois Influence School sees in this combination a central government with limited powers and substantially autonomous local governments, a marked resemblance to the American federal system. In this they followed the lead of Morgan, on whose League of the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois, they rely heavily. Morgan refers to the nations sustaining nearly the same relation to the League that the American states bear to the Union. If that analogy is accepted, then it is plausible to assert, as Grind and Johansen do, that the formation of the American Union in close geographic proximity to the Iroquois League, and while the League was flourishing, suggests that the Union was inspired by or modeled on the League. Grind and Johansen also perceived the influence of the Iroquois League's example on the United States Constitution, and remarks John Adams made in a defense of the Constitution of Government of the United States of America. They quote his statement that, in the form of government of the ancient Germans and modern Indians, the existence of the 3 divisions of power is marked with a precision that excludes all controversy. From this, they inferred that the Iroquois League helped form Adams' view on the separation of powers, and through him, the views of the framers, since the League of the Iroquois was the best example of governmental separation of powers available to Americans for direct observation. Grind and Johansen also point to other references to Indian politics and customs scattered through Adams' book and assert that the book was an important influence on the deliberations of the Constitutional Convention. Indian Roots of American Democracy, edited and with introduction by Jose Barreto. Both Jefferson and Adams felt their experiences with American Indians were important. Adams, like Jefferson, was skeptical of European ideas. Indeed, Adams felt wary of philosophers, theologians, politicians, and historians. They are an immense mass of absurdities and lies. In this intellectual environment, the innovative minds of the period easily turned to American Indian ideas. Franklin, Madison, Jefferson, and Adams were pragmatic enough to know that many of the concepts of American Indian liberty and freedom could not be transferred rapidly to Euro-American forms of government. A few months before the Constitutional Convention, Jefferson wrote Madison about the virtues of American Indian government. Societies as among our Indians may be best, but I believe them inconsistent with any great degree of population. Although most scholars are aware of the knowledge that Jefferson, Madison, and Franklin had of the Iroquois, few have noticed that Adams discussed American Indian governments and his works of American and world governments. Sensing the need for an analysis of American and world governments, Adams wrote his defense of the constitutions of the United States in 1786 and published it in 1787. On the eve of the Constitutional Convention, the defense had been called the finest fruit of the American Enlightenment. Adams saw two conflicting views on the nature of government in America. On the eve of the Constitutional Convention, he recognized in Franklin's admonitions of unicameral legislature, as in the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776, a sense of serenity, of character, since the Pennsylvania Constitution placed a great deal of faith in one house as the best way to express the will of the people. However, Adams believed in a kind of intellectual perpetual motion, where balancing the interests of the aristocracy and the common people through a divided or complex government seemed the best course to avoid anarchy and tyranny. Adams pointed out that the French philosophies were on Franklin's side. Documentary evidence indicates that Franklin talked a great deal about the Iroquois and their customs in the French saloons during the American Revolution. French physician and philosophy Pierre-Jean-Georges Cabanis observed that while discussing concepts of liberty and government, Franklin loved to cite and practice faithfully the proverbs of his friends, the American Indians. Keep the chain of friendship bright and shining. So you hear what they're saying? Benjamin Franklin was kind of always quoting American Indians when he's giving his little philosophies and speeches, right, about liberty and all that. Rather than believing, as Franklin did, in the voice of the people, Adams held a more pessimistic view of human nature. In all orders of society in his defense, he felt that a separation of powers in government was crucial to maintain a republic. With these ideas in mind, one can see how American Indian governments, and more specifically, the Iroquois League, were factored into the intellectual discourses on government at the time of the Constitutional Convention, okay? Drawing on his knowledge and experience with American Indians, Adams' defense urged the Founding Fathers at the Constitutional Convention to investigate the government of modern Indians, because the separation of powers in their three branches of government is marked with a precision that excludes all controversy. In creating a new constitution, Adams believed that the study of the legislation of the Indians would be well worth the pains. In making these statements, Adams recognized that some of the great philosophers of the age, such as Benjamin Franklin and Turgot, were arguing in part for the establishment of governments like modern Indians. Adams implied that the Iroquois style of government had 50 families governed by all authority in one center, He believed that people like Franklin advocating such unicameral governments ran the risk of setting up governments that would develop the individual independence of the Mohawks. Adams knew the basic political structure of Native American confederacies, since he described them in this manner. Every nation in North America has a king, a senate, and a people, all right? A senate, all right? A senator, senate, and a people. The royal office is elective, but it is for life. His sakims are his ordinary council, where all national affairs are deliberated and resolved in the first instance. But in the greatest of all, which is declaring war, the king and sakims call a national assembly round a great council fire, communicate to the people their resolution, and sacrifice an animal. Those of the people who approve the war partake of the sacrifice, throw the hatchet into the tree, after the example of the king, and join in the subsequent war songs and dances. Those who disapprove take no part of the sacrifice, but retire. When the men at the Constitutional Convention embraced the two-house concepts of John Adams, they were not enacting a copy of the English Houses of Lords and Commons. Rather, they were trying to balance the parts of government one from another. Obviously, Adams saw the wisdom of balance and separation of powers in American Indian governments and urged that their examples be examined and copied in part. Adams' admonitions to study Indian governments were not the only ones. During the Constitutional Convention, an editorial address to the federal Constitution used a bundle of arrows imagery, Section 57 of the Iroquois Constitution, and urged the drafters of the Constitution to incorporate the idea of unite or die into their deliberations. You see that? They got that from the Iroquois. During the ratification period of the United States Constitution, Matthew Carey, in consultation with Benjamin Franklin, asserted in a major Philadelphia magazine that Franklin's Albany Plan of Union 1754 had a strong resemblance to the present system. Carey believed that an examination of the similarities of the Constitution and the Albany Plan will convince the wavering. The new Constitution is not the fabrication of the moment. And reflecting on the process of drafting the Constitution, Charles Pinckney, a delegate from South Carolina, observed that from the European world no precedents are to be drawn for a people who think they are capable of governing themselves. During the debates in South Carolina, after the ratification of the Constitution, the Tammany Society, all right, remember who the Tammany Society is, a previous video, toasted the Constitution as our tree of peace that will shelter us with its branches of union. The Tammany Society, which had added or Columbian Order to its name in the 1780s, believed that the United States was a synthesis of European and American Indian ideas, all right? Remember, this is a secret society. This notion persisted in the history of the Tammany Society well into the 20th century. The interpretive and documentary data demonstrate that Native American Iroquois ideas were used in American political discourse during the latter part of the 18th century. Moreover, American Indian notions of confederation and federalism, separation of powers, and uniting vast geographic expanses under a non-colonial government were important alternative concepts that the Founding Fathers used when they found portions of the British system lacking or repugnant. Example, the monarchy, hereditary nobility, the lack of enumeration of human rights. Letting you know they were grabbing American Indian ideas and values, not European. In essence, America is not a complete transplantation of European society. Okay, it's not. And the revolutionary generation rejoiced that in fact. Although there are a few scholars of the American Indian that oppose the notion that the ideas of the Iroquois and or other Native American peoples were a factor in the evolution of American government, there is a body of interpretive and documentary evidence that provides a strong basis for a debate over the degree of American Indian, and more specifically the Iroquois, influence on the evolution of American government. Many colonists and some contemporary scholars may have wanted to assume that Euro-Americans evolved a discrete transplanted European culture without American Indian influences, but the behavioral controls to facilitate such a policy were not present 200 years ago. and it is doubtful that they effectively exist today. Why is it so difficult to understand that when Europeans left Europe, they encountered non-Caucasians and thus were forced to function in a multicultural, multiracial environment, all right? Multiracial. We know that through slavery, segregation, theories of environmental decay, and scientific racism, Europeans and Euro-Americans sought valiantly to create genetic and cultural extensions of Europe. However, North America was not and never would be Europe. Educational, religious, and social institutions were not present to replicate the European order. Moreover, the Euro-Americans needed more institutional control to perpetuate European ways than did the Europeans, because the Euro-American people had viable alternatives to European ways at their doorstep. Colonial governments in America recognized the difficulties in maintaining European ways. In 1747, George Clinton, royal governor of New York, believed that most American democratic leaders were ignorant, illiterate people of republican principle who have no knowledge of the English Constitution or love of their country.
Right, all right. Hold on, guys. So, guys, hold on. I'm gonna get the other video ready. I told we're doing a 4th of July special. Don't go anywhere. We just, getting started here. So hold on. Let me just get that started. What I do want to say, guys, is as you guys can see, the Constitution, the whole thing about independence and all that, and how to set up the government and so-called democracy and republics and all that, they copied that from American Indians. One thing I really want to emphasize is that, a lot of people compare it with the Magna Carta of the Romans, ancient Romans, but you guys got to remember what Romans. They glorified and created a whole fake people. When you're talking about Romans and Greeks, that includes a lot of different people. And where is the true old world? When we're talking about Romans, who are the real so-called Romans? Don't always think Roman means the bad people. Romans included many people who got Romanized, like Israelites became Romans. A lot of Israelites became so-called citizens of Rome. So don't, there's a lot to think about here. What I'm trying to show you here, and I also want you to remember, is that this video, let me show you, hold on. Right? If you haven't watched this, go ahead and check this one out. Iroquois, the Romans of the West, the Romans of America, huh? Guys, remember, what is a Mohawk? Why do the Roman soldiers got this so-called helmet? They were depicting the Mohawks. Like, who are the so-called real Romans? You gotta understand how the Iroquois moved. They literally invaded other tribes, like the so-called Romans. Who is the real creators of the Magna Carta? When we talk about in ancient times, it's the same thing. Remember, our chronologies are false, guys. We got phantoms and duplicates. We're in the wrong chronologies. They try to say, oh, this happened 5 BC. They're creating fake chronologies, guys. You gotta remember all this research we've done. I know a lot of people touchy when I say things like this, because I'm not no Roman. That's not what I'm trying to like. You gotta get away from that idea. Romans and Greeks, so-called. Remember the Greeks? Who are the so-called Greeks? A lot of them are the tribes of Judah. A lot of them are Israelites and Hebrews, which includes also people of Japhet, Hamites too. So it's about an empire, about empires. Okay. So let me just get the next video ready. 1 second. I got you guys. Welcome. I appreciate you guys taking the time to be here on your 4th of July. I don't know if you're busy or you're with people at home or whatever, but I appreciate you guys being here. We're gonna go ahead into the next video, okay? And we're gonna get a little context and background and historical background of the Boston Tea Party, and we're gonna learn about the Sons of Liberty and the Proof Order of Red Men. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoy the next part of today's 4th of July special. All right, let's go. Yeah.
Oh, wow. What do you know about the Boston Tea Party? Well, when I ask most people what they know about the Boston Tea Party, they kind of like give me what is written right here in the History Channel on their history.com website. Let's go over it, right? What do they tell us in school, right?
All right. So I don't know. Manny Jacks. Manny Jacks said, I'm just reading the chat, guys, before we go into the Boston Tea Party. It says, he said, Manny Jacks says North America would never be Europe. Put some respect on. I don't know who you're talking to about that. What you mean by that? All right, all right. I don't think. Okay, you're probably on our side. So let's go.
What's up with all these Indians right here? Was it really Indians? It says here the Boston Tea Party was a political protest that occurred on December 16th, 1773, at Griffin's Wharf in Boston, Massachusetts. American colonists frustrated and angry at Britain for imposing taxation without representation on 342 chests of tea imported by the British East India Company. If you guys recollect on my past presentations regarding the Sephardic Jews and the Moorish crypto merchants that were controlling, a lot of them were the heads of the British East India Company and West India Company, these so-called Dutch. That's who they're referring to right here. So they dumped their tea into the harbor. Who did that? Some random, normal colonist? The event was the first major act of defiance to British rule over the colonists. It showed Great Britain that Americans wouldn't take taxation and tyranny sitting down, and rallied American patriots across the 13 colonies to fight for independence. All right. So it was just some common patriots who were just fighting for their rights. Now, we all know what they told us in school, but let's get into the origin of this Boston Tea Party. Who were the people that did it? Why? And what was the history before that? This is the Loyal Nine, part of the Boston Brahmin series, book 1 by Bobby Acard. Go to this part of the book. It says here, the Loyal Nine. A lot of you probably never heard of the Loyal Nine. We're going to learn about who these people were and the important influence they had on the history of the American colonies and the American Revolution. Boston, Massachusetts became the epicenter of the colonists' opposition to British rule. In 1765, a group of Bostonians formed a social club, in parentheses, right, a fraternal order, like a secret society, attempting to avoid the scrutiny a political organization might provoke. Their purpose, however, was more than social. This group of 9 Bostonians, formed and operating in secrecy, plotted a response to the Stamp Act. All right, that's what we just heard about the Boston Tea Party, right? They were protesting the Stamp Act. They called themselves the Loyal Nine. Although they were respectable merchants, again, who's the merchants, and tradesmen, they were not necessarily the most prominent Bostonians. They were private and unassuming, avoided undue publicity, and were diligent in their secretiveness. The names of the Loyal Nine aren't prominent in American history books, but these 9 men sowed the seeds of the American Revolution. They were average, hardworking Americans fighting against tyrannical rule. All right, we're going to see what was their real purpose, you know. Everybody has a purpose, right? Everything sounds like a nice story until you find out these people were Freemasons. And there's a deeper history underneath all these wars. Very little is known about the Loyal Nine, as they operated in complete secrecy. Since they were a close-knit group made up of 9 men, the organization functioned informally and left very little in terms of paper trail. The membership of the Loyal Nine consisted of Club Secretary John Avery, a distiller by trade; Henry Bass, a cousin of Samuel Adams. He's a cousin of Samuel Adams again. We're going to see who he is. We know about his history, right? A lot of people do. Thomas Chase, a distiller; Stephen Cleverly, a brazier; Thomas Crafts, a painter; Benjamin Eades, a printer of the Boston Gazette. Printer of the Boston Gazette, all right, they controlled the newspaper. Joseph Field, a ship captain, John Smith, a brazier, and George Trott, a jeweler. All 9 men would go on to become active members of the Sons of Liberty, and 4 of the 9 men are documented to have participated in the Boston Tea Party. All right, so it wasn't some random people. So I just brought up the Sons of Liberty. All right, we're going to get into the Sons of Liberty. I know a lot of you already heard of the Sons of Liberty, but these are the forerunners to the Sons of Liberty. For 10 years following the formation of the Loyal Nine, tensions between the British government and the colonies grew. As pressures built in America, chapters of the Sons of Liberty were formed all over the 13 colonies, especially throughout New England, Virginia, and the Carolinas. As the independence movement grew, so did the colonists desire to adopt some form of heraldry. Heraldry was used throughout history as a means to express a group's pride and loyalty. In 1767, the Loyal Nine adopted a 5 red and 4 white vertical striped flag as the group's formal standard. It became known as the rebellious flag, and the 9 stripes paid tribute to the Loyal Nine. All right, you guys hear that? The origin of this flag? With the rebellious flag and the groundswell of support for independence came the Sons of Liberty. We're in the constitutionfacts.com website. Says here, Voices of the Revolution, Sons of Liberty. Says here, when Britain imposed intolerable acts throughout the 1750s and 60s, a great number of men became extremely angry and began to act violently against British loyalists in the colonies. Mobs sprung up all over the colonies, raining terror on those who remained faithful to the crown. And this is like an example of something that was going around that time. It says, the true-born Sons of Liberty are desired to meet under Liberty Tree at 12 o'clock this day to hear the public resignation under oath of Andrew Oliver, Esquire, distributor of stamps for the province of the Massachusetts Bay. A resignation? Yes. One of these groupings would be a secret Boston association known as the Loyal Nine, composed of elite gentlemen. All right, so they were elite, they had money, they were merchants and tradesmen, printers. All right, they were important, even though they said they weren't that important in the last book. Mainly lawmen and artisans, who met discreetly to organize ways to begin to effectively oppose the actions of the crown. The Loyal Nine were responsible for putting boundaries on the rampant violence of Boston and set limits on how far the demonstration should progress. They actively stood against the British policies they found to be immoral and unlawful, and had their hands in projects such as the Boston Tea Party. The original members were Henry Bass, Joseph Field, John Smith, Thomas Chase, John Avery, Stephen Cleverly, Benjamin Eades, George Trott, and Thomas Crafts, but Samuel Adams would eventually become involved in the group, adopting a role as one of its leading members. John Adams, aware of his second cousin's role in the group, did not exactly approve of the methods used and kept his distance from the organization. As time progressed and frustration with the crown began to heat up in the colonies, the Loyal Nine merged into a more famous organization known as the Sons of Liberty. All right, it's going to list out these members. Says the members of this group were Samuel Adams. Real quick, let's not forget. All right, we've gone over this information before. This is the book Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America. It says here in a part of a book, omitting the obvious Hebrew and European Jewish surnames in Stern, some of the surprising entries into the annals of colonial America Jewry include Adams, all right? Adams, so Adams is in there. In another part of the book, it says, in Appendix F are listed the given and last names of the original Massachusetts-based settlers. The list contains a vivid cross-section of Sephardic and Moorish nomenclature. Abel is Hebrew, as are Adams and Agar. Alger is Moorish for Algeria. Now, it's also going to mention that Paul Revere is part of that group. We already know that Paul Revere, as it says here, LeBarry knows that it was the Huguenots who brought the Jewish Moorish craft of silver work into Massachusetts in 1686. Among the best known were Jeremiah Dumas, John Coney, and Paul Revere. Further down it says, even the man with whom Paul Revere wrote to warn the British arrival for war in 1775 bore a Sephardic surname, Dawes, as already pointed out, a derivative of David. The names of some physicians practicing in Boston in 1760 to 1775 are also informative, all right, and it lists Samuel Adams. In another part of the book, it says Adams, with two D's, or Adams, is a Hebrew surname quite plainly, okay? Adam, right? The first man. It has become naturalized as English Christian because two American presidents' cousins bear the name. Yet, it would be more historically sensible to consider that Adams' presidents were likely of Jewish descent than to assume, as has generally been done, that the Adams surname is Christian. In the case of this specific Quaker family in Pennsylvania, the use of Talmudic rabbinic names such as Ephraim would seem to be further evidence of crypto-Jewish practice. All right, it was the Quakers. So you guys get the point regarding Adams. So again, members of the Sons of Liberty were Samuel Adams, Joseph Warren, Paul Revere, okay, Huguenot. We've already proved it. Check out the previous presentations. And it says here, Benedict Arnold. Oh, okay. Benedict Arnold, huh? So real quick, we're going to go to a video I uploaded back in March of this year. It's called Historic Black Americans Thought to Be White, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Whitewash History, all right? This is the cover. So let's see what Benedict Arnold really looked like. Again, one of the Sons of Liberty. This book right here says Benedict Arnold, A Traitor in Our Midst by Barry Wilson. It says here, in those early New Haven days, according to one biographer, Arnold had a strong physical appearance with a distinctive nose, a high forehead, suggesting intelligence, a prominent chin and great piercing eyes. Elsewhere, he has been as short, swarthy, and hard-muscled. According to the Encyclopedia of the American Revolution, he was 5'9", so he's not that short, tall, with gray eyes set by black hair and a swarthy complexion. Who's saying that? The Encyclopedia of American Revolution, saying that he has a swarthy complexion. Benedict Arnold, 1740, senior officer of the British Army who commanded the American Legion in later part of the Revolutionary War. He is best known for his defection from the Continental Army to the British side of the conflict in 1780. So a traitor, right? They'll call him a traitor. These were spies, really. They were swarthy spies. In Encyclopedia of American Revolution, they describe him as swarthy. Does this look like a swarthy person to you?
Nah.
No, this is not swarthy.
He got rosy cheeks.
They're trying to make swarthy into a whole different thing here. Another body snatcher, ladies and gentlemen. And then this is the Legends of the American Revolution, 1776, or Washington and his. And then it says George Lippert. This is an older book, a more primary source. All right, what is it saying about Benedict Arnold? It says that they tell me that his features, swarthy and battle-worn, lost every trace of vivacity. They were rigidly fixed, the lips compressed, the bow calm and unfrown, and wore an expression that no one could read, while his eyes had a wildness in their gleam, a fire in their glance, and told somewhat of the supernatural struggle of work within him, the battle between Arnold's revenge and Arnold's pride. All right, Arnold, the swarthy guy. This is from Claremont Review of Books. The regulars are coming. It says Rick Atkinson's Revolutionary War trilogy looks fair to become the standard account of the war that brought the American Republic into being by Andrew Roberts. All right. It says similarly, Atkinson depicts Benedict Arnold as a muscular and graceful with black hair, a swarthy complexion, and that long beaky nose. He was adept at fencing, boxing, sailing, shooting, riding, and ice skating, and was a fine captain as America would produce that century, a man born to lead other men in dark of night. All right. So you guys get the idea. Yeah, so Benedict Arnold, again, one of the Sons of Liberty members, along with Paul Revere and Samuel Adams. These all could be possibly people of color. Don't assume these are all white people. As you guys can see, Benedict Arnold is being described as a swarthy fellow, so-called black. Now make sure to get all this video. It's a great video. I have a lot of references of different people in colonial history that we thought were so-called white, but they're being described with a dark complexion. And the way they're being described does not look like any of the paintings of them at all. So going back again.
So guys, remember, we've proven a lot of these people were actually black folks. They have whitewash history, guys. Like, a lot of people talk bad about me. They say, oh, Kurimeo's making everybody black. Those same people don't watch my videos. They don't see the sources I show. I've never declared anybody being black that I haven't proven. I don't generalize. And remember, Benjamin Franklin said they were the minority, pale-skinned people. I never said they didn't exist. And they all don't come from incubator babies. Like, that's another thing, guys. So, guys, we have so much research here in the last 8 years. If you're new to the channel, make the time to catch up and understand. Make the time. Everybody always wanted to blame the white man. The white man. That's what they want you to do, guys. All that white privilege and white superiority came after the 1900s. They started in the late 1800s to disfranchise people by their complexion. The whole Reconstruction period, and shout out to Mac, right, from the Autonomous Party, was literally to get rid of Negro rule, the rulership of black folks. Before the 1800s, guys, it was in general melanated people running everything. We're talking about the Articles of Confederation, the presidents, the founding fathers, okay? It's not about complexion, and stop trying to blame a skin color for everything. We must know true history to have real context, all right? So that's why I was showing you this in this video. So we're talking about the Sons of Liberty and the Loyal Nine, you know, and most of the time people always assume these were all so-called white people. Oh, the white man came and took this over this, and you know, nah, man, that's not real history. That's not real history. And again, are these names familiar? Like these last names, a lot of these are your ancestors. They mixed in with American Indians, and that's why you carry these surnames, not because a white man gave their slave, an African slave, the name. That's the story they want us to believe, okay? Okay, so I just want, you know, hopefully that what I just said doesn't offend anybody. It's not about offending anybody, okay? Because a lot of people still troll me and think that's what I'm doing, and I'm trying to make you guys your opinions. No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm just telling you of your other part of you, the other part that nobody wants to acknowledge. But same people are very quick to point a finger at people that look light-skinned and say, oh, you're a foreigner. Oh, you got to be mixed with something. And just because you're so-called black doesn't mean you're not mixed. And that's all I be trying to say. You know, just embrace all your ancestors. Embrace all your lines. All right? Some people may be more Indian than others. Some people may be more European than others. It's not about color. Okay? Let's continue with the presentation.
They were telling us Samuel Adams, John Warren, Paul Revere, Benedict Arnold, Benjamin Eades, John Hancock, who signed the Declaration of Independence, John Hancock, right? Patrick Henry, John Lamb, William McKay, Alexander McDougall, James Otis, Benjamin Rush, Isaac Sears, Haim Solomon, James Swan, Charles Thompson, Thomas Young, Marinos Willett, and Oliver Wolcott. All right, do your independent research on all these individuals. You'll see, you'll pull up a lot of stuff. You might find Freemasons, you might find Swarthy fellows, you might find Sephardic Moorish people. So again, in the BostonTeaPartyShip.com website, we got the Loyal Nine of Boston, the predecessors of the Sons of Liberty. You guys understand now? A well-organized patriot political organization shrouded in secrecy, all right? They were a Masonic order. Was formed in 1765 by 9 like-minded citizens of Boston to protest the passing of the Stamp Act. The Loyal Nine evolved into a larger group of Sons of Liberty and were arguably influential in that organization. Very little is known about the Loyal Nine, as they operated in complete secrecy. Since they were a close-knit group made up of 9 men, the organization functioned informally and left very little paper trail. All right, so now I want to read this article to you. It's called From the Lower Sort to the Lower Orders, Labor and Self-Identity in Boston, 1737 to 1837, by Christopher Sawula, BA in Boston College and a Master's at Emory University. An abstract of a dissertation submitted to the faculty of the James T. Laney School of Graduate Studies of Emory University in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in History, 2014. Page 114. Earlier in the summer, a group known as the Loyal Nine, a political and social club that consisted of middling merchants, printers, and artisans, had decided that Boston needed to resist the Stamp Act with more than petitions and complaints to the Massachusetts Assembly. Although they had been largely successful in turning popular opinion against the Stamp Act through a propaganda campaign largely orchestrated by Benjamin Eades, one of the Loyal Nine and co-printer of the Boston Gazette, they did not possess the skills, connections, or respect necessary to coordinate and execute a crowd action on their own. Consequently, the Loyal Nine approached shipwright Henry Swift and shoemaker Ebenezer McIntosh, both disaffected members of the town's laboring community. The Loyal Nine propositioned the two men after they had grown in infamy as leaders of the Pope's Day gangs. All right, the Pope's Day gangs. We're going to learn about what's that mean, and obtained their needed assistance in organizing a demonstration. The Loyal Nine recruited McIntosh and Swift to organize the August 14 protest based on their ability to organize the town's laborers and plan crowd actions, and selecting the respective leaders of the Pope's Day celebrations. The Loyal Nine sought an influence over the laboring community that they otherwise would have been unable to obtain. Based on the progression of the August 14 demonstrations, it seems very likely that Swift and McIntosh planned the entirety of the August 14 demonstrations as a modified version of the Pope's Day ritual. The effigies, the procession, and the bonfire atop Fort Hill almost exactly mirrored the sequence repeated on Pope's Day. Either the Loyal Nine had studied the Pope's Day celebrations and broken them down into constituent parts, or more plausibly, Swift and McIntosh organized the crowd action along the lines of Pope's Day to ensure that it would be accepted and carried out by the laboring community. You guys got to understand what this means. Pope's Day. So Pope's Day, or Pope's Night, as it says here, right? Also called Pope Day or Pope's Day, was an anti-Catholic holiday. Anti-Catholic. So it was Protestants, Sephardic Jews, Moors doing this, Protestants, Huguenots. It was celebrated annually on November 5th in the colonial United States. It evolved from the British Guy Fawkes Night, which commemorates the failure of the gunpowder plot of 1605. Pope Night was most popular in the seaport towns of New England, especially in Boston, where it was an occasion for drinking, rioting, and anti-elite protests by the working class. Gang violence became part of the tradition in the 1740s, with residents of different Boston neighborhoods battling for the honor of burning the Pope's effigy. Again, as we read in this article, the Loyal Nine were behind it all. This power dynamic suggests that rather than controlling the laboring community and dictating orders, the Loyal Nine could only request assistance from working leaders. Having practiced challenging the social hierarchy during Pope's Day, the laboring community agreed to employ their tradition of misrule for political protest. There you go. All right, so we're back on BostonTeaPartyShip.com. This here, Sons of Liberty, the masterminds of the Boston Tea Party. The Sons of Liberty, a well-organized patriot paramilitary political organization shrouded in secrecy, was established to undermine British rule in colonial America and was influential in organizing and carrying out the Boston Tea Party. The origin and founding of the Sons of Liberty is unclear, but history records the earliest known reference to the organization to 1765. In the thriving colonial port cities of Boston and New York. More than likely, the Boston and New York chapters of the Sons of Liberty were deliberately established at the same time and worked as an underground network in conjunction with each other. It is believed the Sons of Liberty was formed out of earlier smaller scale like-minded patriot organizations such as the Boston Caucus Club and the Loyal Nine, right? Membership was made up of males from all walks of colonial society, but was notorious in recruiting tavern mongers, wharf rats, and other seedy characters looking to cause trouble. Under the cover of darkness, the Boston chapter of the organization held their meeting under the Liberty Tree, and the New York chapter under the Liberty Pole. The Liberty Tree was located in Hanover Square, the most public part of Boston, and was a 120-year-old stately elm, with branches that seemed to touch the skies, according to the Boston Gazette. Taverns with owners sympathetic to the Patriot cause were also the favorite meeting places of the Sons of Liberty. The Green Dragon Tavern in Boston was the tavern of choice for meeting of the Sons of Liberty, right? The Green Dragon. Despite very little documentary evidence as to the origins of the organization, Boston patriot Samuel Adams is often credited as being the founder and leader of the Sons of Liberty. All right, so real quick, I just want to show you guys It's not just a couple of people in these societies, and they're not just recruiting people that want to start trouble. These are very important people. This is an actual alphabetical list of the Sons of Liberty who died at Liberty Tree, Dorchester, August 14th, 1769. And you can see the first one is Samuel Adams, John Avery. And remember, John Avery was a Loyal 9 member. A lot of these are very prominent people in colonial times. They're not just some bar owners. All right, so it's a big list. A lot of people here, a lot of familiar last names. Here's a familiar name, Paul Revere. Paul Revere, right? Sons of Liberty. We got John Hancock right here. John Hancock, a member of the Sons of Liberty. Now, another name that I noticed is this fellow right here is Robert Hughes. Robert Hughes, or best known as George Robert Twelves Hughes. So Robert Hughes, that's him. George Hughes was one of the last survivors of the American Revolution. He was a participant in not only the Boston Tea Party, but many political protests. All right, so I'm going to bring you to another previous presentation. This is from September of last year, 2021. The name of this video is The Mulatto Indigenous American Revolutionary Martyr, Crispus Attucks from Massachusetts. All right. Yeah, he was a native Indian. This is a very good video right here. Make sure to check it out if you haven't. We're going to go to a specific part when we're talking about Robert Hughes, right? George Robert Hughes.
All right, guys, so we're actually going to skip this part because we're going to get the whole video right after this. And so just remember Robert Hughes and what he did. What was he involved in? All right. All right, we're going to get that on the next drop. All right. One second.
In an effort to hide their true identities, many of the Sons of Liberty primary source from one of the Sons of Liberty members, a shoemaker by trade, but he's telling you that they dress themselves as Indians and paint themselves with coal in their face to make themselves look dark complexion. Straight up, basically is what I was trying to point out.
Okay.
So as it says here, disguise of Sons of Liberty, in an effort to hide their true identities, many of the Sons of Liberty attempted to pass themselves off as Mohawk Indians, because if caught for their actions, they would have faced severe punishment. Reports from the time described the participants as dressed as Mohawks or Narragansett Indians. The disguise was mostly symbolic in nature. They knew they would be recognized as non-Indians. The act of wearing Indian dress was to express to the world that the American colonists identified themselves as Americans and no longer considered themselves British subjects. They were not dressed as Indians in the classic sense with headdresses and full authentic regalia. Rather, they wore wool blankets, mashed coat style, painted their faces with soot, and employed other modes of dress commonly known at the time as Indian dress, which had been adopted by soldiers during the French and Indian War. An observer of the Boston Tea Party, John Andrews, wrote the following in 1773. They say the actors were Indians. Whether they were or not to a transient observer, they appeared as such, being clothed in blankets with the heads muffled and copper-colored countenances. Copper-colored countenances, huh? Dark complexion, copper-colored, each being armed with a hatchet or axe and pair pistols. Nor was their dialect different from what I conceived these geniuses to speak. All right, they were even talking the dialect of the Mohawks or Iroquois, as their jargon was unintelligible to all but themselves. So up here, real quick, they said they painted their faces with soot. Just want to show you guys, soot is the same thing. A black powdery or flaky substance consisting largely of atmospheric carbon. All right, black. This is soot right here, and this is a man with soot in his face, and this is black peat. What's the difference? They're painting themselves with soot to look like Indians, huh? We're in the New York Public Library Archives and Manuscripts website, and we're just going to be reading about the Society of Tammany now, or Columbian Order. All right, they have the name Columbian for a reason. I'm going to show you who influenced them, really. Who is the Society of Tammany, or the Sons of Tammany? Basically, an organization that sprung out of the same ideas and same actions of the Sons of Liberty and the Loyal Nine. The Society of Tammany, or Columbian Order, was a fraternal, patriotic, and benevolent society founded in New York in 1786. It was officially organized under a constitution in 1789. The society played an instrumental role in the development of the Democratic Party in New York during the 19th century, and the names of its meeting place, Tammany Hall, became synonymous with democratic machine politics in the city. St. Tammany societies began their existence in the 18th century as social clubs in the American colonies, notably in Pennsylvania, and flourished during the Revolutionary era in association with the American cause. Tammany, or Tamanen, was a Delaware Indian chief and contemporary of William Penn, who later acquired the role of a patron saint of America in popular culture. Right? They made this chief a saint. And I'm going to show you who did that. The choice of patrons emphasized the American identity of the society, which initially required native birth for its officers in contrast to fraternal societies associated with European heritage, such as St. Andrew's Society, St. George Society, and the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick. Like other Tammany societies, it modeled its organization, structure, and culture on an amalgam of Native American and national traditions. Its meeting place was the wigwam, and its membership was divided into 13 tribes, representing the original 13 states, led by Sachems. The Grand Sachem was elected annually at its head. William Mooney, its first Grand Sachem, and John Pintard, all right, a wealthy merchant, who's the merchants, and its first Sagamore, or Master of Ceremonies, figured prominently in the society's foundational years. All right, its first Sagamore, John Pintard.
Hey guys, remember about the Pintard, and what he had, how he was involved with Christmas. Remember that. Check out my Christmas videos. Okay.
So we got Tammany Hall, right? So we just read about William Mooney and John Pintard, who helped found this Tammany Society. Again, this is offshoots of the Sons of Liberty, same ideas, same people. It became the main local political machine of the Democratic Party and played a major role in controlling New York City and New York State politics and helping immigrants, most notably the Irish, rise in American politics from the 1790s to the 1960s. Further down says the first Grand Sachem, as the leader was titled, was William Mooney, an upholsterer of Nassau Street.
Oh, what's going on? We got a little black spot here, guys. My fault. That's from the original video. It should come back soon. Let me see. It'll come back. Hey, welcome. If you hopefully you guys enjoying the presentation. All right, it should come back. I gotta fix that on the original. I gotta take that off. All right, so we were talking about Pintard, his involvement with the Tammany, St. Tammany secret society order. Okay, we're almost there. Hold on.
Real quick, who's John Pintard? Says he was an American merchant. Who's the merchant and philanthropist, right? He had wealth, money. And check this out. He was a descendant of Antoine Pintard, a Huguenot. Yeah, this guy who started the St. Tammany. And you're going to see what else he did.
All right, the Pintards are Huguenots. Guys, remember who the Huguenots are. A lot of people hate when I do this. Even black folks don't like it because they don't want to be associated to so-called white folks or colonists. But the Huguenots, when the Moors, right? Listen, when the Moors and Sephardic Jews got kicked out or driven out by force or by voluntarily, Moors and Sephardic Jews ended up, a lot of them in southern France, they became known as the Huguenots. Okay, we've proven it so much, guys. We've proven, and we've shown the records of these people being described as so-called black, all that. Like it's there. Catch up.
Very prominent person in American history, but we don't know nothing about him. What's a Huguenot? We got a lot of new people, guys, so let's make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. It says here in the book, History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors, with a sketch of the civilization which they achieved and impaired to Europe by Henry Copey. This is from 1892. Go to page 445. It's telling us how Columbus' ships left from a Moorish port, and many of his sailors were men of Moorish blood in their veins. It has been asserted that when the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in the south of France, who afterwards, abhorring the Roman Catholic persecutions, became Huguenots. And that of these many emigrated at a later date to South Carolina and eventually to New England and New York, just like John Pinter's family, who are Huguenots or Moors who were driven out of Spain and Portugal. They ended up in southern France. La Rochelle was actually a big Huguenot, Sephardic, crypto-Jewish, crypto-Muslim town. John Pinter. Pinter had inherited a legacy from his maternal grandfather, John Cannon, and this allowed him to go into China and East India trade. Like his father and his grandfather before him, John served as an alderman to the city of New York. Pinter drafted the Constitution of the Tammany Society. All right? He did it. Developed the titles of the members and urged the canonization of Christopher Columbus within the society. That's a Huguenot who did that. The society was renamed the Society of St. Tammany or Columbian Order in the city of New York. John was Secretary of Mutual Insurance Company from 1809 to 1829. He served as Secretary of the New York Chamber of Commerce. He served as Treasurer of the Sailors' Snug Harbor. He was instrumental in the purchase of the property of Staten Island. He also was a founder of New York Historical Society and Massachusetts Historical Society. John Pinter served as manager of the state lotteries and was first Sagamore of the Tammany Society. He was also elected a member of the American Antiquarian Society, so very important person, again, a Huguenot / Moor. So we're talking about the Tammany Society, offshoots of the Sons of Liberty. So again, as it says in this book, The Tiger, The Rise and Fall of Tammany Hall by Oliver E. Allen. It's going to tell us again that the society's first Grand Sachem or leader was an upholster and paper hanger named William Mooney, an ex-soldier who it was rumored had deserted the Continental Forces in 1776 and gone over to the British. The charge was never proved, and anyway, by the late 1780s, Mooney was claiming to be avidly patriotic. Quite possibly, though, Mooney was just a figurehead and not the real guiding spirit of the society. For the evidence indicates it was a prosperous, liberal-minded merchant and philanthropist named John Pinter who gave Tammany its initial and special stamp. A modest man, content to let others take the spotlight, Pinter drew up the society's constitution and, more important, summed up its most salient tenet, an aversion to upper-class privilege and a belief in the common man. It was Pinter also who seemed to have invented much of the complex array of Indian-style offices, titles, and ceremonies for which Tammany became widely known. Tammany members, or braves, each year elected 13 sachems to rule the society, plus a scribe secretary, a treasurer, a sagamore, master of ceremonies, and a Wiskinski doorkeeper. The sachems chose of their group to be Grand Sachem, or head of the society. The President of the United States was ex officio considered the Great Grand Sachem.
All right. So who's doing all this? We're talking about a Huguenot, right? And I know people don't like it, but hey, this is so-called black man. Yeah. Even though it's not really about the color, but it is important to understand that. It's a big detail they left out of history to us when they whitewash people. And it does affect how we think of history today. Now, if I'm telling you all these people, most of these people were melanated folks, most of them from Europe. Some of them might have some Indian here and there, you know, when they ancestors came in the 1600s or whatever and mixed in, but then they kept mixing with other Europeans. So maybe not a lot of Indian. Some of them are not Indian at all, but still melanated people. Okay? Just remember that and know that.
Each of the 13 sachems in turn was to rule a tribe within the organization, and each tribe had its own Okema, warrior, Makawala, hunter, and Alang, clerk. These subsidiary groupings, however, did not last long and were little more than vehicles for planning social events and ceremonies. All right, so it was John Pinter who brought all that Indian dress-up and terminology, ceremonial practices, and all that. Now remember the Boston Tea Party. It told us that many of the Sons of Liberty attempted to pass themselves off as Mohawk Indians, All right, so they dressed up. So was that really just a random thing? Because we know the Saint Tammany, that's what they were doing. They actually dressed like that. Not only them, we're going to read about now the Improved Order of Red Men. All right, this is the book Official History of the Improved Order of Red Men, compiled under the authority from the Great Council of the United States by past great Icohonis. And this was written in 1893. Before I begin, though, as it says here on the website redmen.org, the Improved Order of Red Men, America's oldest fraternal organization.
Come on, guys, hit the like and share. Make sure this video gets viewed, recommended by YouTube to others. All right.
Who are the Red Men? The fraternity traces its origins back to 1765 and is descended from the Sons of Liberty. All right, so we already know who that is. These patriots concealed their identities and worked underground to help establish freedom and liberty in the early colonies. They patterned themselves after the great Iroquois Confederacy and its democratic governing body. You see, it was Freemasons who grabbed the constitution of these Iroquois. Why? Why the Iroquois? We're going to get into the Iroquois. Be ready to empty your cup with the Iroquois. And its democratic governing body, their system with elected representatives to govern tribal councils, had been in existence for several centuries. After the War of 1812, the name was changed to the Society of Red Men, and in 1834 to the Improved Order of Red Men. They kept the customs and terminology of Native Americans as a basic part of the fraternity. Some of the words and terms may sound strange, but they soon became a familiar part of the language for every member. The Improved Order of the Red Men is similar in many ways to the other major fraternal organizations in the United States. It says here, History of the Red Men. The Improved Order of Red Men traces its origin to certain secret patriotic societies founded before the American Revolution. They were established to promote liberty and to defy the tyranny of the English crown. Among the early groups were the Sons of Liberty, the Sons of Tammany, and later the Society of Red Men. All right, you guys see the order we just went through? Now, the Improved Order of Red Men has many locations. This is Jacksonville, Oregon website here. This says the Improved Order of Red Men Charter, Freiburg, California. Improved Order of Red Men in Wheeling. Then we got the Red Men Lodge at Port Morris, New Jersey. And then talk about their history right here. The Improved Order of Red Men. Some of their badges here. A bit funny to me, you know, when I see these pictures, and especially when I see Brad Pitt on them. Yeah, for some reason, this guy looks like Brad Pitt to me.
Remember, we're looking at photos from the, you know, like these are more modern, right? Late 1800s, early 1900s. So by then, yeah, a majority of pale skin people. But again, who was the founders? Who's the founders? All right.
This is another one right here, the Society of Red Men organized at Fort Mifflin. You can see the drawings. Some pictures right here, Improved Order of Red Men, as you guys can see how they're just taking the clothing and traditions. How do we know a lot of these people didn't use their fraternal connections to become part of indigenous tribes today? I mean, look how they're dressing up like it's a costume party or something. Right here, they even painted their face red. More pictures as you see here. Some more pictures as you guys can see. And their costumes. All right, look at that. And some more. They got funny wigs. It's just funny to me. I don't know. But you guys can see. All right, so yeah, they're literally these little fraternal orders secretly dressing up like Indians and having a big role in history. So again, back in the book, The Official History of the Improved Order of Red Men, now that you guys know who they are. Again, this book from 1893. We're going to read from chapter 3 of this book, Patriotic Societies. I go to page 154, and it says here, there is a record of a dinner given by the Sons of Liberty at Dorchester, August 14, 1769. Many and important were the events that transpired, some of which are repeated in contemporaneous history, but concerning the minor details of which there is much obscurity, owing to the exceeding delicacy of the position occupied by the colonists, and the absolute secrecy necessary as regards the personal identity of the patriots engaged in many of the proceedings of those times. Finally came Thursday, December 16, 1773. The Old South Church was filled to suffocation, more than 2,000 people being in the building. The meeting had been called because the arrival of 3 vessels loaded with tea, which it had been proposed to land in defiance of the express wishes of the people, who refused to pay the tax the representatives of the king had attempted to collect thereon. The ships were moored off Griffin Wharf, now Liverpool Wharf, near the foot of Pearl Street. Addresses were made by Samuel Adams, Young Rowe, Quincy, and others. It was unanimously, remember, these are Sons of Liberty people, it was unanimously resolved that the tea should not be landed. Besides the large crowd in the church, it is estimated that more than 7,000 people had gathered on the outside. Messengers were sent to the governor to try to persuade him to arrange for the return of the vessels without an attempt to land the tea. About 6 o'clock, the messengers returned and reported that they were unsuccessful. The record from which we quote continues. Now remember, we're getting the whole details here of the Boston Tea Party. No sooner had he concluded than Samuel Adams arose and said, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." Instantly a shout was heard at the porch. The war whoop resounded, and a band of 40 or 50 men disguised as Indians rushed by the door and hurried down toward the harbor, followed by a throng of people. Guards were carefully posted according to previous arrangements around Griffin's Wharf to prevent the intrusion of spies. The Mohawks, and some others accompanying them, sprang aboard the 3 tea ships and emptied the contents of 342 chests of tea into the bay, without the least injury to the vessels or any other property. No one interfered with them, no person was harmed, no tea was allowed to be carried away. There was no confusion, no noisy riot, no infuriated mob. The multitude stood by and looked on in solemn silence while the weird-looking figures, made distinctly visible in the moonlight, removed the hatches, tore open the chests, and threw the entire cargo overboard. All right, you guys picture that? So while they're doing this, everybody's like all awkward, like, wait, what's going on? Why are they doing that? And who's these people dressed like Indians? So it was all planned. It wasn't all crazy. They got to the point. They did what they had to do. Nobody got hurt. This strange spectacle lasted about 3 hours. And then the people all went home and the town was quiet as if nothing had happened. The next day, the fragments of the tea were seen strewn along the Dorchester shore, carried thither by the wind and tide. A formal declaration of the transaction was drawn up by the Boston Committee, and Paul Revere was sent with dispatches to New York and Philadelphia. I remember Paul Revere, a Huguenot and a Sons of Liberty member, where the news was received with the greatest demonstrations of joy. In Boston, the feeling was that of intense satisfaction, proceeding from the consciousness of having exhausted every possible measure of legal redress before undertaking this bold and novel mode of asserting the rights of the people. Resuming a little further on, it says, "We call attention to the fact that Paul Revere was sent by the Boston Committee with dispatches to New York and Philadelphia. This corroborates the claim we have made, that these societies were united by secret modes of communication and were in full harmony and communion in the common work in which they were engaged. The connection between the Sons of Liberty and the St. Tamina Society of Annapolis, Maryland, is clear and distinct. While the St. Tamina Society of Maryland was the first of which we have record to use the name of an Indian as the patron saint of America, and of the said organization, the Sons of Liberty was the first organization of which we have record to use the disguise of Indians and presumably their forms and customs for the patriotic purposes for which they were organized. In the year 1771, the Society of Sons of Liberty adopted the title of Sons of St. Tamina or St. Tamina Society and set apart the first day of May as their anniversary, all right? You see, the same people, same order. We quote from our former authority, Mr. Ridgely, in his Annals of Annapolis, who says, in this year, 1771, and for many years later, there existed in the town of Annapolis a society called the St. Tamina Society, who set apart the first day of May in memory of St. Tamina, the patron saint whose history is now lost in fable and uncertainty. All right, so I'm going to end the video right here. Again, I just wanted to go ahead and touch bases on this. It opens up to a lot of other videos I got coming. Wanted to introduce these societies and their roles and the people active in these societies, who they were, just to get a better understanding of what was really going on in these colonial times with these so-called wars. And what is the connection with the indigenous tribes that they were dealing with, and why they were grabbing like their models of constitution for their own constitution that they were creating, like the Iroquois, for example. So these are all future videos. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thanks for tuning in once again. Pura vida, much love and respect. Awa.
We ain't done. We got one more video to show, okay? One more video to show. Don't go anywhere, okay? Let me get that ready. All right, welcome. If you just joined us, we've gone over the origins of the U.S. Constitution, the whole idea of a democracy, a republic, and having rights for people, and creating order, right? They got that from the Indians. Then we went over the true background of the Boston Tea Party. Okay. Next, there isn't no 4th of July, commemorance without one of the first martyrs of the revolution, okay, which was the indigenous brother, Crispus Attucks, okay? We're gonna go way back. We're gonna get it like it's the first time. Okay? And this is a lot older video, so just bear with me with my reading. I've gotten a lot better over the years, okay, guys? So, but let's honor and remember Crispus Attucks, his indigenous so-called black brother. All right. Crispus Attucks, the first martyr of the revolution or of liberty. Okay. That's what they like to tag him. We're gonna get the whole background behind Crispus Attucks. Okay, let's go.
Good afternoon. This is Pamela Lynn Kolthauser, reporter for the Abolition News Network, broadcasting live March 10th, 1770, at the National Martyrs Mausoleum. Today we are going to talk to the first American martyr of the colonies about an event known around the world as the Boston Massacre. Please welcome Crispus Attucks. Welcome, Mr. Attucks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's just start. So now, why don't you describe to us in detail the events that took place on March 5th, 1770 on King Street in downtown Boston?
Well, it was a cold, moonlit night. There was about a foot of snow on the ground, and all of a sudden a church bell rang out. And then shortly after that, a rumor was spread that a barber was being abused by some British sentries, and a angry crowd grew in the streets of Boston. So I grabbed my corkwood stick and I went out and I said, we're going to keep the peace. I wanted to keep the peace, and no one was going to fight.
Okay. Well, before you go on with the story, what do you think the people of Boston, just an ordinary citizen, how did they feel about British rule, or even the Boston girls dating the British soldiers?
We don't like it. We don't like them dating our girls. We just don't like them lobsterbacks. They're just not, it's just horrible. And now we're like a garrison town with the British troops having unchecked power.
Okay. So who ended up firing the first shot that night?
It happened so fast. It was about 9 o'clock, and a brick was thrown, and one of the British sentries, he was stepping back and he slipped on a piece of ice, and when he slipped back, he fired up in the air.
Wow. So what happened next?
Well, after that, about 8 British troops from the 29th Regiment, they came and they fired head on towards the crowd, and I was hit first with 2 shots in the chest, and then 2 more were hit after that.
Wow. Can you describe the scene on the streets afterwards?
Well, I don't have to. Paul Revere, he put together this engraving to show exactly what happened, and as you can see, the British troops, they were firing point blank range at us, and it was just horribly bloody. Samuel Adams, he called it the bloody butchery.
Wow.
Oh, look what he says. Let me read this. Unhappy Boston, see thy sons deplore, thy hallowed walks besmear with guiltless gore.
While faithless Preston and his savage bands with murderous rancors stretch their bloody hands.
Like fierce barbarians grinning over their prey, approve the carnage and enjoy the day.
If seedling drops from rage from anguished wings, if speechless sorrows laboring for a tongue,
Or if a weeping world can aught appease the plain of ghosts of victims such as these.
the patriots' copious tears for each are shed, a glorious tribute which embalms the dead.
But know each summons to that awful goal, where justice strips the murderer of his soul.
Should venal courts, the scandal of the land, snatch the relentless villain from her hand.
Keen execrations, on this plate inscribed, shall reach a judge who never can be bribed.
Africans and Native Americans by Jack Forbes. It says here, the above examples are duplicated by ones from other states, and together they should illustrate the thesis that the term mulatto can only be interpreted as referring to mixed persons with Native American ancestry, being a potential part of the mixture, especially during the periods when Indians are identified as being servants or slaves alongside of Africans. It is apparent that no other terms such as half-breeds or musties are utilized. Mulatto is, therefore, the only legal reference to racially mixed persons of whatever background. At this point, it would be well to note other evidence showing that the mixed African-American people in Massachusetts, dodged the hijack with African, a rather numerous group, were consistently referred to as mulattoes. Again, mulattoes, they were just talking about Indians. Or as people of color. Again, mulattoes or as people of color. Paul Cuffey, the noted half-Indian, half-black mariner and merchant, referred to himself and his relations in petitions as of our color, Indian men, and all free Negroes and mulattoes. Now, isn't this similarly? Crispus Attucks. We're going to get into Crispus Attucks. I'm going to let you know who he really was. Similarly, Crispus Attucks, who died in Boston Massacre, was a Native American extraction but called a mulatto. He is usually described as a mulatto, but it seems probably that he was a native Indian from Framingham who was also of Negro blood. So he's saying also of Negro. What does he mean by that? We're going to go into it, right?
The classic example is someone like Crispus Attucks. Now, when he runs away from his master, he was an indentured servant and not a slave. When he runs away from his master in Framingham, Massachusetts in 1750.
So we're talking about Crispus Attucks running away, right, from his so-called master. Well, we'll see really what that means. But he literally just said he's an indentured servant, right? He wasn't a slave. Indentured servant people, they have contracts, and usually the master is only referred to as master because you're the apprentice. That's where that whole master thing comes from. All right, guys, just so you understand. So just to add context to what he's saying, okay? He wasn't really ever a slave, guys. He worked on a ship. He was an apprentice on a ship. Okay, let's go.
The original newspaper's announcement posting a reward for his return described him as a mulatto fellow, literally. And in 18th century parlance, at least in New England, mulatto means a person of indefinite pigmentation. That indefinite pigmentation could be a result of racial mixing. That's not necessarily the case. That person could be a mixed European Indian, could be a mixed European African, could be an African Indian mixture, or could simply be an Indian person who Europeans assumed had a vague sort of brownish skin color. There's absolutely nothing to imply in that usage that Crispus Attucks is an African. There's absolutely nothing to imply in that usage that Crispus Attucks is an African.
All right, so I'm going to read to you from this book. It's called the American Historical Record, or a scholarly journal, right? This is from the collections of Harvard University, all right? From Harvard University. Again, this is the American Historical Record and Repertory of Notes and Queries concerning the history and antiquities of America and biography of Americans, edited by Benson J. Lawson, 1872, all right? So on page 531 of this book, we read, who was Crispus Attucks? And it says here, the record is indebted to Mr. J.B. Fisher of Philadelphia for the following interesting inquiry concerning the nativity of Crispus Attucks. And I'm going to read here, it says, in Boston on the 5th of March, 1770, a party of men, mostly sailors, marched from Dock Square to State Street, then King Street, and assaulted the guard at the Custom House. This mob was led by a man almost a giant in stature. A giant. This is an aboriginal. In the affray, several of the assailants were killed. Among the killed was the gigantic leader, Crispus Attucks. This has generally been considered as the scene of the first blood shed in the American Revolution. So again, according to Wikipedia, Crispus Attucks, right, it says, was an American stevedore of African Dutch to hijack and Native American descent, widely regarded as the first person killed in the Boston Massacre and thus the first American killed in the American Revolution. The first American, all right, not African American, Crispus Attucks. Historians disagree on whether Crispus Attucks was a free man or an escaped slave. Again, historians disagree. They don't know. They just be making up things, all right? But most agree that he was a Wampanoag. Most agree. They all knew he was a Wampanoag. Again, who did the pilgrims encounter when they arrived? The Wampanoag. And I already showed you who the Wampanoag were, what they looked like. An African descendant says, thought to hijack. Two major sources of eyewitness testimony about the Boston Massacre, both published in 1770, did not refer to Attucks as black nor as Negro. It appeared that the Bostonians or European descent viewed him as being of mixed ethnicity. According to a contemporary account in the Pennsylvania Gazette, Philadelphia, he was a mulatto man named Crispus Attucks, again mulatto, who was born in Framingham, but lately belonged to New Providence and was here in order to go for North Carolina. Because of his mixed heritage, his story is also significant for Native Americans. He is Aboriginal. Who was Crispus Attucks? By the testimony of the witness given at the trial in November of 1770, he is called the mulatto. I believe grave doubts can be thrown on this assumption, and that the weight of carefully examined testimony will prove that he was a Massachusetts Indian. Again, he was a Massachusetts Indian. This guy's gonna prove it to you. Are you guys ready? All right. You think I'm just making up things? You see, I'm pulling out another source here, right? From Harvard University. All right. So again, this guy's telling you that this assumption that he was a mulatto, meaning that he was mixed with African, is an assumption, and that it has that the weight of carefully examined testimony will prove that he was a Massachusetts Indian, and that the first life lost in our great revolutionary struggle was that of one of the ancient possessors of the soil of the race which produced a Philip of Mount Hope and other great minds and capable leaders. You hear that? Your ancestor. He was the first hero of the Revolutionary War in the U.S. He was an American native and aboriginal. All right. In the book History of Framingham, Massachusetts, early known as Danforth's Farm, 1640 to 1880, with genealogical register by J.H. Temple. And in this book, we go to page 61. It says here, in the occupation, it says warrant to Edward Michelson, Marshal General. Now they're talking about a warrant sent out for the basically the capture of Captain Tom Indian and a John Attuck Indian, right? And it's basically they framed him for doing something without no proof, without him getting any trial or anything. He swears he wasn't there, and basically they hanged them. They executed these two people. So let's read what it says. You are to take notice that the council hath condemned and sentenced Captain Tom Indian and John Attuck Indian, enemies, to be hanged on this day after the lecture till they be dead, which you are to cause and see the executioner to perform his office and execute them accordingly. Dated 22nd of June, 1676, by order of the council. Edward Rawson, secretary. See that he was framed and murdered. And then it continues, probably John Attuck, who was executed with Captain Tom, was an ancestor, right? John Attuck, an ancestor of Crispus Attucks, a revolutionary fame. We're gonna see who Crispus Attucks is. Most of you probably already know. And yes, that was his ancestor, John Attuck, an Indian. All right, so Crispus Attucks is an Indian as well. This whole Attuck last name, Shattuck and Attuck, is an Indian word, or American Aboriginal word. Okay, so in this journal of the Early Republic, it says volume 29, number 2, from 2009. It says, from forgotten founder to indispensable icon, Crispus Attucks' black citizenship and collective memory dodged a hijack with black. Okay, so it says here, Attucks, of course, lived and died a subject in the British Empire. Despite many biographical treatments and extensive historical investigation, little is known with certainty about his life, so they don't know anything. Attucks' brief appearance in the historical records has stimulated both professional and amateur historians to dig for details. Some evidence has been uncovered, but most is circumstantial, leaving much to speculation. Alright, much to speculation, and I'm telling you, the African part is the speculation. The most widely accepted construction of Attucks' life suggests that he was born around 1723 in the town of Natick, a multi-tribal praying town, the praying Indians, of Christianized Indians near Framingham, about 20 miles west of Boston. He was likely of mixed African and Indian ancestry, possibly descended from a man named John Attuck, who was executed in 1676 for his ostensible role in King Philip's War. And we already know that was a fraud. They framed him. All right, so you know the mentality these people are coming from. Crispus Attucks was a large man, over 6 feet tall, and probably enslaved to William Brown of Framingham, until he escaped in 1750, after which, at times using the pseudonym Michael Johnson, he worked as a sailor and around the docks in Boston and elsewhere around the Atlantic Basin, until his fateful role in the events of March 5th, 1770. In this book called A Retrospect of the Boston Tea Party, with a memoir of George R.T. Hughes.
I remember who George R.T.W. Hughes, right? This is the part that I skipped on the last video because we were going to go over it on this video. Remember, he was one of the, Sons of Liberty, Loyal 9, all that, okay? Remember that. That's who they're talking about. He wrote this. Listen to what they did. This is from his personal account, primary source, okay?
Survivor of the little band of patriots who drowned the tea in Boston Harbor. You hear this? So one of the persons who actually threw the tea over. All right? And this was in 1834. All right, so according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, right, online, if you're not familiar with the Boston Tea Party, basically it's written that it was an incident in which 342 chests of tea belonging to the British East India Company were thrown from ships into Boston Harbor by American patriots disguised as Mohawk Indians. All right, so they dressed up like Indians to blame the Indians, right? The Americans were protesting both a tax on tea, taxation without representation, and the perceived monopoly of the East India Company. All right. Okay, so back in the book, A Retrospect of the Boston Tea Party, with a memoir of George R.T. Hughes. All right, survivor of the little band of patriots who drowned the tea in Boston Harbor, right? From his own account, one of the persons, right, that dressed up as a Mohawk. It says here that, let's go a little bit down. It says, when the committee returned and informed the meeting of the absence of the governor, there was a confused murmur among the members, and the meeting was immediately dissolved, many of them crying out, "Let every man do his duty and be true to his country." And there was a general huzza for Griffin's Wharf. It was now evening, and I immediately dressed myself in the costume of an Indian, equipped with a small hatchet, which I and my associates denominated the tomahawk, which and a club, after having painted my face and hands with coal dust in the shop of a blacksmith. Again, what did he paint his face with? Coal dust. All right, now if you get coal, right, what is going to happen to your face, right? This is
Yes, guys. Okay, so we went over. That's what I'm saying, guys. Look, if you're new to my channel, you haven't seen these videos before, and you came here late today, guys, please watch from the beginning. Yes, it wasn't specifically like tea how we think today, but you could make tea out of what they dumped too. So check it out. Yeah, they had many different herbs and so-called drugs or hallucinogens that they dumped over. We're talking about cannabis. You can make tea with cannabis. You can make tea with a lot of different herbs. Okay. They also had opium. They had like what we would consider drugs today in the Boston Tea Party. That's what they dumped. Now imagine that a ship comes in with all these supplies. Imagine your whole connect, your whole supply is gone. That's gonna make a lot of people angry. All right. So guys, please watch from the beginning. Come on. We went over that already. I know I see you guys asking in the chat. Watch from the beginning, guys.
is like well, this is a coal mask. And this is a coal mask. This is what so this is what they, why would they want to look black? Why, if they want to look like Indians, would they paint themselves black? Right? Why would they paint themselves black if they wanted to look like Indians? Because coal is really dark, right? Now it says he actually writes about the people who got killed during the Boston Tea Party massacre. 3 of our citizens fell dead on the spot, and 2 who were wounded died the next day, and 9 others were also wounded. The persons who were killed I will recollect, said Hughes. They were Gray, a rope maker; Maverick, a young man; Colwell, who was the mate of Captain Colton; and Attuck, a mulatto. They're talking about Crispus Attucks, a mulatto, right? Remember, mulatto. And Carr, who was an Irishman. Captain Preston then immediately fled with his grenadiers back to the guardhouse. Continuing the book of the history of Framingham, it says here, Crispus Attucks, who is admitted to have been the leader of the party, was a mulatto. Remember what Jack Forbes says about mulatto in Africans and Native Americans book.
So look at all these references of Crispus Attucks being called mulatto, right? And he's not an offspring of a white person with an African. So that's why we try to help you out understand, and you got to get rid of those concepts they put in us growing up, like mulatto means this, mulatto means that. It's just because the way he looked. It's just because he wasn't as dark as what they would call what they want to reference to be a Negro, and he wasn't light skin either. So they just mulatto, and they knew his parents. He knew it was Indian. Mulatto just meant a mixture of 2 different nations. Those 2 different people don't necessarily have to be black or white. It could be a black European with an Indian, a black Indian, and their offspring would be called mulatto. 2 different nations coming together, okay? And many times they was just calling Indians mulatto just to call them mulatto because of how they look, okay? So remember all the info we've gone over. And guys, please stay on topic. If you say something that has nothing to do with what we're showing, I'm going to delete it. And eventually I'm going to time you out so you can just chill. Okay, let's continue with Crispus Attucks.
Born near the Framingham town line, a short distance to the eastward of the state arsenal, the old cellar hole where the Attucks family lived is still visible. He was probably a descendant of John Attuck, an Indian. He was, who was taken prisoner and executed at the same time with Captain Tom in June 1676. Probably the family had intermarried with Negroes, probably. who were slaves, and as the offspring of such marriage were held to be slaves. He inherited their condition, although it seems likely that the blood of 3 races coursed through his veins. He had been bought by D. William Brown of Framingham as early as 1747, but he thus early acquired some ideas of the value of manhood and liberty, as appears from the following advertisement in the Boston Gazette, October 2nd, 1750. Ran away from his master, William Brown of Framingham, on the 30th of September last, a mulatto fellow, about 27 years of age, named Crispus, 6 feet 2 inches high, short, curled hair, his knees nearer together than common, and had on light-colored beaver skin coat, plain brown fustian jacket, or brown all wool one, new buckskin breeches, blue yarn stockings, and checked woolen shirt. Whoever will take up said runaway and convey him to his aforesaid master shall have 10 pounds old tenor reward, and all necessary charges paid. And all masters of vessels and others are hereby cautioned against concealing or carrying off said servant on penalty of the law. A descendant of D. Brown says of him, Crispus was well informed, and except in the instance referred to in the advertisement, was faithful to his master. He was a good judge of cattle and was allowed to buy and sell upon his own judgment of their value. He was fond of seafaring life, and probably with consent of his master was accustomed to take coasting voyages. The account of the time says he lately belonged to the New Providence and was here in order to go to North Carolina. He was a huge bodily proportions and brave almost to recklessness. John Adams, who defeated Captain Preston at his trial, says, Attucks was seen about 8 minutes before the firing at the head of 20 or 30 sailors in Cornhill, and had his hand a large cornwood stick. He was a stout fellow, whose very looks were enough to terrify any person. You hear that? It was scared of you. When he came down upon the soldiers by the sentry box, they pushed him off, but he cried out, Don't be afraid of them. They dare not fire. Kill them, knock them over. At the firing, he was killed instantly. 2 balls entered his breast. He was about 47 years old. Captain Preston was tried in October. In the 8 soldiers, December 8th, the defense was conducted by John Adams and Josiah Quincy Jr. The captain and 6 of the soldiers were acquitted, and 2, Matthew Kilroy and Hugh Montgomery, were brought in guilty of manslaughter, branded and sent to Castle Island. It says Attucks was born in Framingham. Town histories of Framingham written in 1847-1887 describe him as a slave of Deacon William Brown, though it is unclear whether Brown was his original owner. In 1750, Brown advertised for the return of a runaway slave, Crispus. We got that, right? In the advertisement, Brown describes Attucks and his clothing when he was last seen. And I wanted to get to this part right here. It's important. It says in 1874, an article in the American Historical Record, look it up people, by G. Bess Fisher, recounts a passage in the memoirs of Boston Tea Party participant George R.T. Hughes, which stated that at the time of the massacre, Attucks was a Nantucket Indian. At the time of the massacre, Attucks was a Nantucket Indian, not African, a Nantucket Indian. Now look what it says here. Though he is commonly described as an African American in popular culture, right? In popular culture. 2 major sources of eyewitness testimony about the massacre. 2 major sources of eyewitness about the massacre, both published in 1770, did not refer to Attucks as a black nor as a Negro, but rather as a mulatto and an Indian. A mulatto and an Indian. In an account from the Pennsylvania Gazette, a man who may have been Attucks was referred to as a mulatto man named Crispus, who was born in Framingham but lately belonged to the New Providence and was here in order to go forth from North Carolina. We already got the sources, right? However, during Attucks' time, mulatto was often used to describe skin tone rather than ethnicity. Again, during Attucks' time, we've already gone over this with Jack Forbes, right? I'm trying to tell you, they're just talking about light-skinned black person, and it says that at the time of Attucks, when he lived, that mulatto was often used to describe the skin tone rather than ethnicity, and sometimes referred to full-blooded Native Americans. All right, full-blooded Native Americans. First, the term mulatto was applied very loosely up to a late date. In 1834, the Mashpee Indian case before the Massachusetts legislature, Honorable Charles Marston, one of the overseers, testified that Mr. Fish had a Sunday school principally composed of white children. He did not recollect ever seeing more than 8 colored children in it. There were more whites. The overseer paid the school mistress 7 and 6 pence a week, and she boards herself to an Indian who kept school in winter, was paid $12 and $19 a month. The whites who attend Mr. Fish's meeting never pay anything to him or to the church. When the tax is required, the people get rid of their tax by attending Mr. Fish's meeting. There was always twice as many whites as blacks in society. Last summer, 1833, he counted 18 colored persons, and twice that number of whites. Mr. Dwight, one of the committee, asked if so many whites being there did not tend to discourage the Indians from being interested in the meeting. Mr. Marston thought it might apes Indian nullification, Boston 1835, page 165. Here the terms colored persons, blacks, and Indians are synonymous. They all mean Mashpee Indians. Again, you can find this in Apes Indian Nullification from Boston 1835 on page 165. You listening? That here the terms colored persons, blacks, and Indians are synonymous. They are all mean Mashpee Indians. When they're saying black and Indian and colored, they're just talking about the Mashpee Indians in these records.
All right. Any questions? So again, when people try to say I make everybody black, like Longo, they don't watch our videos, guys. People just talking out their ass, literally, out their butthole, and they don't know what we have shown over the years. This is from a video from 7 years ago. This is from a video I uploaded 7 years ago. You think he even bothered to look at it? You think anybody that always tries to troll, come here, not understand? Oh, they say, oh, he's blackwashing. You know what the funny thing is, guys? Is that nobody had a problem when everybody was being whitewashed. Nobody had a problem when you open the Bible, you see all white folks. Nobody had a problem when you see all these colonial paintings and people being all white. Nobody said, why you making everybody white, Mr. Professor? Nobody had a problem growing up with an all whitewashed generalized image of history. Nobody had a problem. But now that we're correcting it and showing the sources as why we're correcting it, now everybody want to say we're trying to make everybody so-called black. I know we ignore them. I'm just putting them out there. We're showing the sources. He's not even listening. So it's not about one person. Not about one person. Okay. But look at this, guys. This right here should debunk all these Pan-Africans. There's one little thing right here. There's one little thing right here. When they're telling you colored folks, blacks, and Indians, they meant the Mashpee Indians in this area. They were calling Mashpee Indians blacks, colored. We have so many references of this, right? We're talking about the American Revolution, right? We're talking about 4th of July, right? Well, we're talking about that they murdered a so-called black Indian, okay? Crispus Attucks. Let's continue.
All right, so again, before I continue with that article, I want you to see what they mean. So again, in the book they're referring to, called The Indian Nullification of the Unconstitutional Laws of Massachusetts Relative to the Mashpee Tribe. So this book is all about Mashpee Tribe Indians. But what he's saying is you're gonna see the word colored, black, and Negro, I believe, and it's all synonymous, or Indian synonymous, to the Mashpee Indians. All right, for example, all right, let's go to page 25 here. Again, page 25, it says, we're talking about the Mashpee Indians, right? It says, leaving Mashpee for New Bedford, I preached at several places on my way and delivered lectures on Indian affairs. Many of the advocates of oppression became clamorous on hearing the truth from a simple Indian's lips, and a strong excitement took place in that quarter. Some feared that an insurrection might break out among the colored people. They're talking about, again, the Mashpee Indians, colored people, all right, in which blood might be shed. Some called me an impostor, and others approved of my proceedings, especially the Quakers, whom I ever found benevolent and ready to help us. Their generous goodwill toward colored people of all races is well known. Page 43 it says, this is not an excuse, however, for the government of this commonwealth, whose duty it was to see that its red children were not abused in this way. Red, right, copper colored. We greatly fear that our white fathers did not much care about their colored children in Marshpee. Again, colored children in Marshpee. We're talking about the Marshpee Indians. On page 56 of this.
So remember, colored, right?
This book, it says, "O ye who despise Indians merely because they are poor, ignorant, and copper-colored." Again, only because they are Negro, you despise. What happened to the so-called Negro, right? What did you fight for in the 60s, right? You were being discriminated, you were being despised just because you were Negro. All right, and it says here, "O ye who despise Indians merely because they are poor, ignorant, and copper-colored tribes of America. Do you not think that God will have respect unto them?" And this is in reference to what the American Historical Record was talking about in this book. It says on page 108, and Mr. Fish now has but 5 colored members of his church. So they're talking about Mashpee Indians, not talking about an African American. All right, remember that. And of the 5 colored persons, but 1 is male, and he has recently signed a paper saying he has been deceived by Mr. Fish's petition. All right, so these are Mashpee Indians, and records here being called colored.
All right, I just want to remember, this is from 7 years ago. I didn't say that right. I meant they're not talking about an African, a person coming from Africa. Okay? Because many so-called African Americans are the Indians. All right, so don't misinterpret what I said here 7 years ago. I just meant he's not from Africa. Okay?
Colored. All right, what did it call you? Colored, right?
I came from what you might call 2 cultures. Although I went to a purely white school, my schooling on the other side was through my elders. Now, for example, I was fully aware that we as a people could not talk our language. If we were, and we were convicted of it, the authorities could take our tongues. Could be in meetings. The only place that we could meet without interference was at the Indian Church and Meeting House. And there we got around that and did our tribal business, because instead of having a tribal council, we had a church council. Instead of, say, a chief, you had a deacon. Instead of a medicine man, say, a prophet.
So again, we're turning to the American Historical Record here. In this book, again, it said that in the book Indians Nullification, right, the one we just came from, that the terms colored persons, blacks, and Indians are synonymous. They all mean Marshpee Indians. Okay, so let's continue here. It says, in 1763, Marshpee was incorporated as a district in words as follows: be it enacted in that all lands belonging to the Indians and mulattoes in Marshpee. This seems to be alliterative law, phraseology covering a people by the names by which they were usually known. Again, in the trial, Boston, 1824, to show that the terms mulatto and Indian were synonymously used, see examination of Ebenezer, Brigham, and Samuel Quincy for the Crown, page 9, all right? You see that? So mulatto, Indians were being called mulatto, all right? Basically, with no African in them. Question, did you see a mulatto among the persons who surrounded the soldiers? Answer, I did not observe. Question, did they seem to be sailors or townsmen? Answer, they were dressed, some of them, in habits of sailors. Oh, we got this in the other book, right? The third witness after this is Lanford. Question, did you know the Indian who was killed? Answer, no, there was an Indian there, right? We're talking about Crispus Attucks. Did you see anybody press on the soldiers with a cordwood stick? Answer, no. Both these questions refer to Attucks. Again, Attucks. He was the Indian who was called the same day both Indian and mulatto. So he was referred to as Indian and mulatto in the same day, right? Thus it seems that Brewer, who called Attucks the mulatto fellow in 1770, was justified by an act of incorporation which called Indians mulattoes in 1760. You hear that? And in the absence of other testimony, such evidence does not in the least prove him to be of African origin. But we have direct testimony. Mr. George T. Hughes, one of the famous Boston Tea Party, published his reminiscence in New York in 1835. On page 103, he says, Mr. Pierce remembers Attucks distinctly, though he never saw him before. Attucks, also, who he says was a Nantucket Indian. He was a Nantucket Indian belonging on board a whale ship. So we go to the source in this book called The Traits of the Tea Party, being a memoir of George R.T. Hughes, one of the last of its survivors, with a history of that transaction, reminiscence of the massacre and the siege, and other stories of old time. Again, this is one of the guys who threw the tea over in the Boston Harbor that caused the whole Boston Massacre. All right, it says here by Bostonian in 1830.
He's one of the Sons of Liberty. Remember, we got the drop already today. Sons of Liberty member. Okay. From this book right here, 1835.
All right, we're gonna go to page 102. Down here in the bottom, it says the street began to be noisy. Fire was cried in varied quarters. Some of the engines turned out. The people came rushing in, many of them armed with sticks and stakes wrenched out on the stalls, in the market and elsewhere. In large proportion of them, undoubtedly as much disposed to enjoy a row as the soldiers themselves. Attucks, a colored man, again, Attucks, the colored man, right? First he's colored man. Now on the next page talks about how he was basically, well, it says here, according to all accounts, figured pretty largely among them. Says that he was seen there. People were seeing him supposedly leading the mob. Only some 10 minutes before that event, one of the witnesses at least swore that he saw him at the head of 20 or 30 sailors in Cornhill with a cordwood stick in his hand. Mr. Pierce, who stood about this time at the corner of Royal Exchange Lane, now Exchange Street, and King Street, where the sentinel was on guard in front of the King's Custom House, remembers Attucks distinctly, though he never saw him before. He remembers also that he had a large stick in his hand, and that he saw him early in this tumult, harassing and abusing the sentry, poking him rather severely with the stick and calling him a lobster, a popular reproach, and swearing that he would have off one of his claws. Pierce thought the soldier would hurt him and advised him to refrain. Attucks, now listen to this, also, who he says was a Nantucket Indian. Again, he's saying Attucks again. First, they're letting us know down on this side that Attucks, the colored man, right? Now, Attucks, also, who he says was a Nantucket Indian belonging on board a whale ship of Mr. Folger's, then in the harbor, and he remembers distinctly the peculiar noise of a frightful war whoop which he yelled. This Attucks he cautioned to keep off and be careful. He declined, however, though he crawled back a little, muttering and still swearing he would have one of his claws off. Mr. Adams, in his subsequent defense of the soldiers, seems to refer to some of these circumstances when he describes the multitude shouting and hustling, threatening life, the bells ringing, the mob whistling and screaming like an Indian yell. Again, like an Indian yell. The people from all quarters throwing every species of rubbish they could pick up in the street. This is a strong coloring and is applied to the scene which immediately followed the arrival of the soldiery from the main guard to relieve the sentry, Attucks. Adams again says this Attucks appears to have undertaken to be the hero of the night and to lead this army with banners, to form them in the first place in Dock Square and march them up to King Street with their clubs. Bailey, a witness, says, I saw a number of men going up Cornhill, and the mulatto fellow headed them in number between 20 and 30. They appeared to be sailors. Again, Attucks, who he says was a Nantucket Indian. He's an Indian. There's more records of him being referred to or being linked with American native than an African. As Mr. Pierce remembers Attucks distinctly, though he never saw him before. Attucks, also, who he says was a Nantucket Indian. He was a Nantucket Indian belonging on board a whale ship. Biographer Mitch Catchum, as well as multiple 19th century Framingham town histories, have drawn a connection between Attucks and John Attuck of Framingham, a Narragansett man who was hanged in Framingham in 1776 during King Philip's War. The word for deer in the Narragansett language is atuk. Kachung also noted a possible connection to a probable Natick woman and possible Attucks' mother or relative named Nanny Peter Attucks, so both sides, right? Who is described as a Negro woman. Again, look what's going on. They're telling us that they have records of a Natick woman, a Natick tribal woman, possible Attucks' mother or relative named Nanny Peter Attucks, who is described as a Negro woman. All right, this is a whole different story, but it relates to what we're talking about. It's related to Crispus Attucks. You see how they're just changing American Aboriginals into Negro or Black or African Americans, right? With no real proof. There is a bigger history. There is a recorded history. There's another story being told. If you really read the sources and the books and put it all together like we're doing right now. It says here in the book, Peter Attucks Jacob. It says here was a he worked for Colonel Joshua Buckminster in Framingham, 1730. Nanny, May 19, 1737. Prince Youngie, probably descendant of John Attuck, the Indian who lived in the east of the state of Muster Grounds. Alright, so it says that a Natick woman and possible Attucks' mother or relative named Nancy Peter Attucks was described as a Negro woman in 1747 estate inventory of Framingham slaveholder Joseph Buckminster, and along with Jacob Peter Attucks as probable descendant of John Attuck the Indian in an 1847 history of Framingham. Alright, we have progressed thus far. Attucks was a sailor and the leader of a mob of sailors. Now first, for two questions to analyze. Was it dramatically probable that Attucks was a Negro in, at that time, slaveholding Massachusetts, that he should have been the leader of a mob of sailors? The Negro at that time in Massachusetts was in the usual servile social abasement that attends slavery. So he's saying he couldn't be a Negro because he would be enslaved. He wouldn't be having these roles that Crispus Attucks played in the Revolutionary War and the Boston Massacre.
So remember, guys, we gotta know when to dodge the hijack when we're reading these things, right? They're saying, oh, Negroes at this time were blah, 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 blah. No, a lot of the so-called slave masters were the Negroes too. Like this whole Buckminster that they were under, which they were under as indentured servants, right? Not official like chattel slaves. That they could have been black folks too. This is what I'm saying. Like we gotta empty our cup. You know, we're just reading these things. You know, this is something I should have said 7 years ago, but at that time we didn't even know how deep Black Europeans were 7 years ago. All right, so I didn't mention it, but I'm telling you now. And this is the things you gotta always have context with when you're reading stuff like this. You know, don't assume that all black folks were just slaves, guys. Okay.
In view of dramatic properties of time and place, I do not think if Attucks had been a Negro that he could have been, in the words of John Adams, on the 5th of March 1770, the hero of the night, leading his army with banners, formed in dark squares up to King Street.
So, Mikael Awaken says that Crispus Attucks was a Wampanoag chief. Can you please prove that and show the sources? Because he had nothing to do. But he wasn't a chief. He was just an Indian. Like he wasn't one of the chiefs. Now, if you have some info that we can show, feel free to post the sources. All the Indians in Massachusetts are not just Wampanoags, guys. His people were from Framingham. If you don't know Massachusetts, well, you know because you said you grew up, but that's in the middle, right? Massachusetts, right? The Wampanoags were more on the coast. That's who the Pilgrims met, right? There's a lot of different Indian tribes in Massachusetts. They may associate with each other and mix in with each other, but they're not all the same. Okay. Hey, guys, you know, we're not here to shout out. Like, we don't worry about what, I don't care what people say, man. I don't care what people self-proclaim. I got respect for people, but ego, right? Humility is, you know, yeah. I mean, yeah, okay, so let's continue.
His social status would have been such that the probabilities are against it. As an Indian, however, again, as an Indian, however, it would be different. Crispus Attucks might in character be the leader of an affray or the inaugurator of a revolution. As an Indian, this is possible. A fact or two will serve to demonstrate my position. While at that time in Massachusetts, the Negro occupied the most servile position, the Indian occupied one of almost social equality with the white population. You hear that? In the office of the Secretary of State in Massachusetts will be found a muster roll containing a return of men enlisted in the 1st Regiment of Continental Troops in the county of Barnstable for 3 years and during the war in Colonel Bradford's regiment, commencing in 1777. Among these volunteers are the names of 26 Marshpee Indians. The whole number drawn from the county of Barnstable numbered but 149 men, nearly 1/5 of whom were volunteers from the little Indian plantation of Marshpee, which then did not contain more than 100 male heads of families. These Indian soldiers fought during the war, and as far as can be ascertained from documents or tradition, all but one fell martyrs to liberty. In the struggle for independence, there was in 1835 but one Indian living among who received a pension for his services as a revolutionary soldier in Marshpee, old Isaac Wickham. You see the name Isaac, right? Hebrew, Wickham. And he was not in Bradford Regiment. Parson Hawley, in a memorial to the legislature in 1783, states that most of the women in Marshpee had lost their husbands during the war. At that time, there were 70 widows at one plantation. Such were the Massachusetts Indians during the Revolutionary War. We can realize that Crispus Attucks, a gigantic specimen of such a race, could lead the crowd that came whistling, screaming and rending like an Indian yell up King Street on the 5th of March, 1770. I have every reason to believe that the Negro makes a good sailor, and there is no reason why Crispus Attucks might not have been a Negro and a sailor on board Captain Folger's whale ship. We also know that the Massachusetts Indians were a nautical people, and they were, and have been and are still employed on whaling voyages. And you're also going to find the history of Cape Verdeans as whalers as well, and they're from that region. A lot of the ancestry of Cape Verdeans go back many generations in Boston and on New Bedford and all these places, Providence. So as you can see, the Native Americans also have a history of whaling voyages in New England. A writer in the Boston Advocate in 1833 says, "I am informed that many of our stoutest whalers are produced among our small Indian tribes." Abe says on page 78, "Sometimes an Indian bound on a whaling voyage would earn $400 or $500, and the shipmaster would account to the overseer for the whole sum." To this day, the remnants of some of these tribes are sailors, and I am told the Gayhead Indians are renowned as boat steerers and harpooners, very responsible positions also, so that Crispus Attucks as a sailor was at any rate as likely to be an Indian as a Negro, and much more likely to be the leader of a party of sailors. Upon this hint, I examined Barry's History of Framingham. On page 64, I find a note relating the marriage of Prince Yonge, a Negro, in 1737 to Nancy Peter Attucks of Framingham. The name says Mr. Barry, indicating Indian extraction, Attucks. We will refer to that again. In 1764-65, the number of Negroes in Framingham is given at 25. Had Crispus Attucks been among them, I am certain the Reverend historian would have found it out. The native Indians appear to have been the primitive occupants of the town. In 1676, John Otok, his wife and children were condemned for participating in King Philip's war. The lives of the women and children were spared, so he was framed. Remember, we read that. It does not seem clear whether John Attuck, query Attucks, was executed or not, and he was executed, we read before. Roger Williams, in his Key into the Language of America, defines Attucks, deer, cotton, vocabulary of the Massachusetts or Natick Indian language, defines Attuck a deer. Eliot's Bible, same language, Natick or Massachusetts, deer, Attuck, Song of Solomon. The surname Attucks, and then evidently an Indian, a Natick Indian, and not a Negro surname. Again, the name Attucks is then evidently an Indian, a native Indian and not a Negro surname. All right. And you got this name, the Shattuck, as well here in all this region. Most likely Aboriginal last name or Aboriginal people. Prince Younger has been posited as the father of Attucks. However, Younger did not arrive in Massachusetts until the mid 1720s after Attucks was born, and did not marry Nanny Peter Attucks until 1737, after which point they had children, who are noted in multiple histories, but among whom Crispus is not mentioned, a son who died young, and Phoebe, who never married. Neither Phoebe nor the son are recorded with the Attucks or Peter Attucks surname. All right. All right, so hope you're following along. I want to show you something here. Again, we're returning to the books called A History of Framingham, Massachusetts, early known as Danforth's Farms, from 1640 to 1880, with a genealogical register from J.H. Temple, 1887. Now, again, they're saying that Crispus Attucks is half African or mulatto because his dad is African or African American. Again, and Wikipedia told us that there is no record of him having a son named Crispus. Really, so let's read what it says in the actual account. It says, a noted character of the class under consideration was Prince, sometimes called Prince Young, but whose name is recorded as Prince Youngi and Prince Jonah, by which last name he is noticed in the town records in 1767. He was brought from Africa when about 25 years old, having been a person of consideration in his native land, from which circumstance perhaps he received his name. He was bought by Colonel Joseph Buckminster, Jr., and was afterwards owned by his son D. Thomas Buckminster. He married in 1737 Nanny Peter Attucks, a native tribal woman, remember, of Framingham, by whom he had several children, among them a son who died young, and a daughter, Phoebe, who never married. Again, Crispus Attucks was born in 1723. Around that time, they're saying that his father is Prince Younger, but we know that he didn't marry Nancy Attucks until 1737, and there's no mention of him being his dad in any records of these historical places of Framingham or anything like that. All right, that's why I wanted to show you guys this. This is what they do in mass. How they hijack everything and just start labeling everybody African American or Negro or Black. Now, I claim that Crispus Attucks was a native Indian from Framingham, a sailor employed on a whale ship of Captain Folgers from Nantucket, then lying on 5th March 1770 in Boston Harbor. It may be argued that Attucks was a half-breed Indian, part Negro. This is possible, but I have found no proof of such a fact. Again, I have found no proof of such a fact, and I haven't either. The fact of Folger's ship being in Boston Harbor is a matter of record, and that record which I have not seen may settle the question of his nationality. The town records of Framingham may throw some additional light on the question that may prove my error, but until such further development is made, he stands as a native Indian from Framingham. All right? Have anybody been able to disprove this? I'm sorry. Has anybody been able to this day? I'm talking about right now, 2018. This is a native Indian from Framingham, Crispus Attucks. They telling you he's African American. With his native Indian name, his occupation dramatically in character, a sailor, and a leader of sailors, and the hero of this opening affray that led to American independence and a rapidly approaching continental empire.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. And we reached the end of today's presentation, guys. This 4th of July special. Just wanted you guys a little context and history about this day. Okay. While you're out there celebrating with family and everything. Okay. Mikael, just please catch up on the channel. Okay. Just please catch up on the channel. I'm not taking it around. You're generalizing. And when was he a chief? That should be in writing. That should be in writing somewhere if he was a chief. A chief of who? The Wampanoags weren't just in Natick or, all Massachusetts wasn't just Wampanoags, okay? Yeah, they spoke Algonquin languages, these tribes, and some of them did relate anciently or married into each other, but they weren't all the same. Okay? So stop going back and forth with me, man. And we're at the end. I was literally about to time you out, man. But we're at the end, so you made the cut. Go talk to Wayne again, man. Say, hey, what do you know about Kurimeo? Go ask him. Me and him have talked on phone, man. I know he's an elder. He's a lot older than all of us. And he's also Cape Verdean. He's not just Indian. Okay? Did he tell you about his Cape Verdean side? Did he? I'm trying to tell you. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to that because I've done the research and I talked to the people and all that. Okay, so just I'm not trying to make you look bad. I was just trying to help you understand something. I'm not saying you all wrong. I'm just saying you're generalizing a little bit, and I want to see the proof that he was a chief. Why does every Indian have to be a chief? Everybody want to make all the Indians chiefs or themselves chiefs. Yo, Backfoot was mine. What's up, brother? Hey, man, thanks for coming through, man. Appreciate you. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's presentation. Okay. There was a lot of good info. But there's a lot of real good info in this that we're gonna probably follow up on, future videos, But I appreciate you guys making the time to be here on your day off from your barbecue or whatever you're doing, chilling, driving, in your garden, or even working. I know a lot of people work. They get paid double and stuff. So if you do that, hey. But I thought it was important to go over this today, especially on 4th of July, so people can understand what it is that they're celebrating and what is the history of these holidays, just like we do with other holidays. Okay. Again, appreciate you guys very, very, very much. Shout out to anybody that donated. All right. Shout out to all my moderators. Shout out to all my supporters on Patreon and any channel members, especially any that became members today during the live. Yeah. Hey man, you're stubborn, dude. I'm not arguing with you, man. Get out of my channel, man. Sheesh, I don't want to see you right anymore, man. You're very stubborn. I'm literally telling you, I know Wayne, and Wayne thinks very highly of me. He's spoken to me. We've talked together on a phone call, man. Years ago. I'm talking about like 7, 8 years. Like that's how long he's been following me. He still supports me. He's on my Patreon. Dude, chill, man. You're like, some of y'all very stubborn, man. Like, okay, I get it. You learn from him, but I know him. You learn from, but I've spoken to him. Okay? Sheesh. Hey, appreciate you. You're very welcome, man. Thank you. Thank you, all of y'all. Thank you to all of y'all. Thank you. I'm out. We're gonna go out with a banger here. It's called Whoop Whoop. Whoop Whoop. Check it out, guys. This is a little banger right here. Little banger right here. Appreciate you guys, okay? I'll give you your day back. Go chill with your family and everything. I got a really, really, really good video coming tomorrow. We're going to read this chapter in this book we've been reading, The Discovery of Europe by Native Americans. They call them, right, by American Indians, by Jack Forrest. We're going to read chapter 5. So much drop in that chapter. I hope you guys tune in tomorrow. We're going to read that whole chapter. There's so much drop in that chapter, and you guys are going to enjoy it. Thank you for coming through. All right. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawa. Wow. Ay, 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 ay.